come of these talks? Ottawa is tempering expectations. We'll take you live to Washington, where our reporters are standing by at the White House. And another top story we are following today. Israelis mark 2 years since Hamas attacked southern Israel. Militants killed 1,200 people, including 8 Canadians, and took more than 200 others hostage. About 20 are believed to be alive in captivity. Israel's bombardment and military occupation of Gaza also continue following the attacks of October 7th. So far, more than 67,000 Palestinians have been killed, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. The latest round of peace talks in Egypt are in their second day. And we have reporters across the region. Krista Gomansing is in Sderot with the latest on the situation in Gaza. Paul Hunter is where the massacre at the Nova Music Festival unfolded 2 years ago. And CBC News chief correspondent Adrian Arsenault is in Tel Aviv. But we do want to begin in Washington. In a little over an hour from now, Mark Carney is expected to arrive at the White House for this second meeting at the Oval Office with Donald Trump. The Prime Minister is facing pressure to get tariffs on Canadian goods lowered or removed. But expectations, as we mentioned, are being tempered. And the CBC's Katie Simpson is on this story. She joins us from outside the White House now. So, Katie, set the scene for us. What are you expecting to happen today?
As you walk on into the White House complex, you can see the Canadian flag out front Blair House. That's where the official Canadian delegation is holding before Prime Minister Mark Carney will come over here for his second Oval Office meeting in just a short time, really. Now, expectations heading into this weekend, there had been some tempered optimism. According to 3 senior Canadian government sources, there had been an expectation that there could be some sort of relief, partial relief, when it comes to steel tariffs. However, all of the sources speaking with CBC News and Radio Canada have really stressed that that is the expectation, and there is a big difference in the word expectation and guarantee. When you deal with Donald Trump, so much is unexpected, and so that adds to sort of the anxiety and the pressure and the tension coming into this meeting. The key priorities for Canada in this meeting, obviously trade, trying to normalize that relationship with the United States, seeking tariff relief for a whole host of tariffs, and of course trying to find other ways that Canada and the United States can work together to sort of try to repair the relationship that has really been under a lot of stress since Donald Trump returned to office earlier this year. Canada has been pummeled by tariffs, and while, Canada is in a bit of a better spot than other countries in terms of exceptions to some tariffs, carve-outs in some places, it's still been an incredibly difficult go for Prime Minister Mark Carney. New tariffs have been added. Certain tariffs have been hiked. The relationship has experienced some very tense moments. This summer, Canadians will remember Donald Trump lashed out on social media and from behind his desk in the Oval Office, frustrated with Canada's proposed digital services tax, ready to, pause trade talks that had at that point been heading in a good direction. Deadlines came and went, and there's been no major breakthrough. So again, it all adds to the pressure in this moment. Now, some other key things to possibly look for in addition to trade, perhaps Canada finding new ways it can work with the United States on sort of the shared goals on the global stage. Think of the defense, think of foreign policy, those kinds of things. But again, the key thing here for Canada is try to sort of make some headway. There had been, some very cautious optimism when it came to tariffs in the steel and aluminum sectors, particularly in the steel sector. But again, everything is so tempered by sources with extreme sort of caution and the real emphasis that this is Donald Trump and he's unpredictable.
And as we've been mentioning, of course, Katie, this is the second visit for Mark Carney to the Oval Office. You've touched on just how tense this relationship has been. How are the two sides preparing? What do we know of how Carney's office is trying to navigate all of this?
Yeah, if you take a step back and think about what Canada had to deal with in Trump 1.0, what Canada's dealing versus what Canada's dealing with now in Trump 2.0, it is a very sort of different situation. The unpredictability, that sort of volatility, that remains in place. But when it came to sort of trade negotiations and what was taking place, Canada was dealing with senior officials that, if they signed off on something, Robert Lighthizer, who was the lead trade advisor, the U.S. trade representative, if he signed off on something, that it was pretty much set in stone. We're dealing with a situation now where it's a little bit different, where those sign-offs from different advisors, it's not necessarily the same sort of word. If there is sign-off from those advisors, it's got to go back to President Trump. And President Trump, it sort of depends on who's talking to him last in the moment as to where things are going to necessarily land. Mark Carney was asked about dealing with Donald Trump in an interview just released by The Economist. Have a listen.
He's very sharp. He's very curious about people's opinions on a wide range of issues, and so he will solicit my views, other people's views on topics of the day, particularly international. He's decisive, and he has an ability to change the dynamic very quickly on whether it's with respect to Ukraine, peace in the Middle East, global trade, and beyond.
Expect similar language out of Carney today. Remember that key phrase he used during that first Oval Office meeting, saying, that President Trump has been transformational. Transformational is a word that can mean many things depending on who is listening to it. So again, expect Prime Minister Mark Carney to choose his words very carefully as he heads in for this second meeting.
Thank you for this, Katie. That is the CBC's Katie Simpson standing by outside the White House. And we know also that Ontario's Premier Doug Ford just spoke with CNN moments ago about Prime Minister Carney's visit to the White House. Ford was asked what his plan was if Trump refuses to lift tariffs on aluminum, steel, and lumber.
Well, the question is, what are the American population going to do? You rely on the aluminum coming from Canada to build military and aerospace and manufacturing. You rely on steel as well coming from Canada, and 30% of the lumber to build homes is coming from Canada. The way to create more jobs is make a deal with Canada. The way to reduce inflation is make a deal with Canada. And increase the economy is make a deal with Canada, your #1 export country in the entire world.
Okay, so we heard there from Ontario's Premier speaking to U.S. media ahead of this trip, but we want to talk about it some more. So we've brought in Jason Kenney here in studio. He is a former federal minister holding many portfolios and also the former Premier of Alberta. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Good to be here.
Okay, so first I want to ask you what your expectations are for this visit to the Oval Office.
Frankly, who knows? I see the expectations game is hot and heavy this morning, but I think the Prime Minister is walking in there, I'm sure, prepared to be surprised. We saw some comments from the President earlier this morning, very bullish about the success of his tariffs and forcing Canadian companies to, quotes, relocate back to the United States, he said, and also he said filling the U.S. Treasury with new revenues, reducing the deficit. So I think, I think you never know which Donald Trump you're going to get. He likes to be the deal maker, but if you look at everything he has done and said with respect to the Canadian trade relationship since winning the last election, he seems to have a particular animosity almost towards this trade relationship. It's clear from Jameson Greer, the U.S. trade representative, that they're trying to split Canada and Mexico apart as we move towards renegotiation of USMCA. So I think the Prime Minister is walking into a very difficult and frankly volatile situation.
Potentially hostile. You say that there seems to be some particular animosity. Why do you say that, and why do you think that is?
Well, there's a lot of different theories, but, well, let's look at it from what appears to be Trump's perspective. He actually seems to believe that Canada was part of this unfair global economy that was stealing manufacturing jobs from the United States. I mean, the truth is, of course, we've had highly integrated economies, that the U.S. runs a trade surplus against Canada if you exclude the energy that they buy from us at a steep discount, which they depend on. Canada is the source of 65% of U.S. oil imports. And so without that, gas prices would be demonstrably higher in the U.S. So I think he has this kind of fixed idea that Canada has somehow engaged in gross unfair trading practices. And who pays for this at the end of the day? American consumers, including MAGA voters in Midwestern states who buy F-150s that are going to go up by like $7,000 a unit because of the tariffs on Canadian aluminum.
And part of them also is the tariffs on steel. And sources are saying that steel may be one of the sectors where there is some hope that perhaps there will be a little bit of a lift when it comes to how punishing the tariffs have been. What do you think that is in terms of, or how do you think that plays out in terms of an objective, just sort of step by step?
Yeah, well, first of all, step by step, the Prime Minister committed in the election that he was going to get a comprehensive agreement. And I think he said within 90 days. His May meeting turned out to be a nothing burger, and we just keep, at Kananaskis, he had this two-page non-agreement to a new deadline, which has been violated. I think part of the challenge the Prime Minister has is even if he has a so-called agreement, and these are typically 2- or 3-page statements of intent, the President has demonstrated he's not willing to stand by his own signature, such as the USMCA that he renegotiated with Trade Representative Bob Lighthizer. So I think what the Carney team have been trying to do is to disaggregate, separate different bite-sized issues as opposed to going for the full enchilada. And in this case, it seems that with Secretary Lutnick and their contacts in the administration, they've been trying to focus on steel and aluminum. So they seem to be going into this with some hope of movement on that front. On the other hand, the president, I think 3 weeks ago, was at a steel plant in Pennsylvania celebrating the great alleged success of his steel tariffs, including on Canada. So I'm not sure that Lutnick is actually speaking for the president if he gives indications that there might be some compromise on steel or aluminum.
And to your point, of course, all of the analysis suggests that we really don't know what is going to come out of this, partially because of the unpredictable nature of the U.S. president. But we certainly know that sources told Radio Canada that it was Trump who was the one who extended the invitation to Carney, and then, of course, the teams met to solidify a date. What does that signal to you?
Well, he likes, one thing we know about this president is he likes to do 2 or 3 media availabilities every day, and every weekday when he's not on the golf course, he seems to like to have foreign heads of government in the newly gilded Oval Office to bring attention to himself in part. So I think this is part of his sort of flooding the zone strategy, having the head of government there from Canada. Maybe he actually does want to move forward. Let's hope that's the case. Goodness knows Canada has certainly bent over backwards to address President Trump's alleged concerns about Canada on defense spending, on fentanyl issues, on migration security, rolling back non-NAFTA tariffs on U.S. imports to Canada, obviously rolling back the digital services tax, and many other issues. So Mark Carney, who said he was going to have elbows up, has been giving the White House on issue after issue after issue without getting very much. It's about time that we got something in reciprocity for the Canadian many expressions of goodwill that have come from Ottawa.
You know, finally, Mr. Kenney, I want to ask you, of course, you're a former federal minister with the Conservative Party. You just touched on the sort of reaction that we have seen from the current Conservative Party saying that essentially the Prime Minister has been a disappointment on the trade file. That is what Pierre Poilievre has said at this stage. What would signal a win coming out of this particular talk, for example, or in the weeks following this particular meeting?
Well, I think it would be hard to judge a win based on one statement or one sort of 2-page cocktail napkin statement of intent. I think a win has to be a durable commitment from the president to respect Canadian sovereignty, first of all, which means stopping the 51st state nonsense, respecting Canadian sovereignty, a commitment to the basic principles of USMCA, CUSMA, NAFTA, and to renegotiate that in good faith with give and take, and hopefully an immediate repeal of those non-NAFTA tariffs, including on steel and aluminum.
Okay. I want to thank you so much for your time and for your analysis on this. That is Jason Kenney. He is the former Premier of Alberta. Thank you, Jason, for joining us today. Appreciate it. And a reminder, the Prime Minister's meeting is scheduled for 11:30 Eastern Time, and we will have special coverage starting half an hour ahead of that. Our chief political correspondent, Rosemary Barton, will host along with David Cochrane from Power and Politics. That begins at 11 a.m. right here on CBC News Network. Stay with us. Today marks 2 years since the deadly Hamas-led attacks in Israel that set off the war in Gaza. Our CBC News teams are positioned across the region with full coverage of what's happening on this day. Crystal Gamansing is in Sderot with the latest on the situation in Gaza. And Paul Hunter is where the massacre at the Nova Music Festival unfolded 2 years ago. Meanwhile, our chief correspondent, Adrian Arsenault, is in Tel Aviv. And these are new images of Gaza taken from the border with Israel. There have been huge explosions and Israeli airstrikes through the day around Gaza City. Just over a kilometer away, inside Israel, is where we find the CBC's Crystal Gamansing. She is the latest on the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas and the status of ceasefire talks.
Well, peace talks are underway at a Red Sea resort, but the Israeli military operation has not ceased. In fact, you can still see big plumes of smoke. There have been bombardments of Gaza, mostly concentrated around Gaza City throughout the day. Now, we do know that these intensive military operations are what Israeli officials say need to happen in order to root out Hamas and to secure Israel's future. Of course, the context of all of this is the second anniversary. Concerns around the world about the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Gaza just about 1.5 kilometers away from where I'm standing right now. Now, we are not able to report from inside the enclave, but with the help of a video journalist in Gaza, Mohammed, we did hear from Palestinians who say they want Hamas to take the deal. They want this war to end. They want the option of having some sort of normal life, not having to worry about constant bombardments. Now, Hamas did release a statement today regarding those peace talks, saying that the group was serious about reaching the Gaza ceasefire deal based on U.S. President Donald Trump's plan, and that it is serious to seek ways to overcome any obstacles that remain on the table. Now, those obstacles are pretty big. They are still talking about, the need to disarm, to not have any future role in Gaza, and of course, the question about when and if Israeli forces will leave Gaza. We heard from the Qatari Foreign Ministry spokesperson saying that right now they are not optimistic or pessimistic about talks, saying that things will proceed and they are committed to working with the U.S. to bring this plan forward. They have also stated that time will be required, that there are 20 points to this plan and each require practical implications and implementation on the ground. A number of individuals as well in Gaza and from Arab nations are saying Palestinians need to have a voice when it comes to their future. Donald Trump still confident that there can be a good chance of a lasting deal. As for officials in the humanitarian sphere, they are calling for the immediate release of all of the hostages, for a ceasefire to take place immediately. We heard from the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who said that he hopes that everyone will seize the opportunity currently on the table with the American president's plan, and that he wants to see the, quote, humanitarian catastrophe on a scale that defies comprehension finally come to an end. Crystal Gamansing, CBC News, Sderot, Israel.
It was nearly 400 Israelis who were killed and dozens were abducted during that Nova Music Festival attack. The site is now a memorial to the victims. Each placard lists their name along with their picture and details about their lives. Paul Hunter is at that memorial, and as he reports, the emotional weight is still very much present there 2 years on.
It is the only part of daily life that matters to so many people here, including when you visit here. I say to many people back home, when you come to the Middle East, you understand things much better because of geography. The kibbutz we were at the other day is, you could walk to it from here, right? The attackers, when they came, didn't know about the music festival. They were targeting that kibbutz and others, and they saw this, and then they kind of repositioned themselves because there was such a crowd of people here. You can't overstate the degree to which October 7th is on the minds of everybody. We can't get into Gaza. That's why our reporting is always from this side of the border. because the IDF controls the border, right? But we have videographers inside who interview people on our behalf every day. And you hear the same stories from the other side. They're tired of it. Like, this is too much. It has to stop. It is on the minds of everybody on that side of the border. It is on the minds of everybody on this side of the border. It is on the minds of anybody who comes here. It is in your face. Like, geography doesn't change, right? I came down with today, and you see everything as it was 2 years ago, even though this is what you're confronted with, the sort of sad stories of individual lives. But they're all dead. And that never leaves you. And you look across the border, and there are tens of thousands of people who are dead, right? It's in your face everywhere here, and it is especially pronounced today on an anniversary. It's the way things work. People think even more about such stuff. All day long, people have been coming here and standing in front of these memorials, leaving bits and pieces, touching the photos, saying prayers, and telling us that they just want it to end.
That was Paul Hunter reporting from the site of the Nova Music Festival Memorial, an official ceremony of remembrance for all of the victims of the October 7th attacks will be held at the National Cemetery in Jerusalem on October 16th. With that, we do want to take you now to Ottawa, where Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith is providing an update on efforts to work with the federal government after meeting with the Prime Minister yesterday, and she's taking questions from reporters now. Let's listen into those.
Finally ask you a question in person.
Nice to see you.
So you've communicated that you would like to be in a place where you could submit a West Coast pipeline for consideration to the Major Projects Office next spring. Will you be in a position to do so if the West Coast tanker ban is still in place by then?
Well, I can tell you that we are hoping to have some kind of agreement with the Prime Minister by Grey Cup, where he gives a clear indication that he's prepared to address the 9 laws that have been creating an investment climate that is hostile to private investment. The Pathways project, which we're committed to to reach carbon neutrality by 2050, as well as a bitumen pipeline to the BC coast. So we're working with the Prime Minister on an earlier timeline than that, and we're very hopeful that that will come to fruition. So we'll know in a few more weeks. But the message I've had to the Prime Minister is that it's the oil sands companies who need to have confidence that they're going to be allowed to expand production in order to be able to fill a pipeline. And at the moment, because of the laws that are in place, they don't have that confidence. So that's why we have to deal with these things as a package.
Laura Osmond with The Logic. Can you just give us a sense of some of the folks you're meeting with here on the Hill today as you try to send that message to Ottawa, and give us a sense of how that conversation with the Prime Minister went yesterday?
Well, I did meet with the Prime Minister yesterday. I've met with the Conservative caucus as well as Leader Pierre Poilievre, and I have a number of media interviews to do this afternoon. But it's a Canada Strong and Free event this evening. I think they have a few hundred people there, so I'm not quite sure who is going to be there, but I'll meet with lots of folks who are there. And the conversation with both the Mr. Poilievre as well as with the Prime Minister Carney was the same. It's what can we do to build resource projects, build resource pipelines, be able to get our confidence back in our private investment sector. And I'm really hopeful that the Prime Minister will be able to meet that target of being able to sign an agreement with us by mid-November.
Hi. Nick Murray with Canadian Press. I just have some questions on the changes to the tier system.
Sure.
By many measures, the tier system likely wouldn't be compliant under the federal output-based pricing system, and so I'm curious whether you've gotten any assurances from the federal government that it wouldn't trigger the federal backstop.
Well, that's part of why we're having a conversation about how we adjust some of the programs. We want to maintain the carbon pricing at the provincial level. We've had carbon pricing since 2007. It's worked for us. We've invested nearly $2 billion in CO2 technologies, CO2 abatement technologies, including the Shell Quest project, the Carbon Trunk Line. We've mapped out 25 of our reservoirs for capturing CO2 in pore space. We have supported hydrogen. We supported bitumen beyond combustion, geothermal, direct air capture, lithium, nuclear studies. So it is worked for us. We want to be able to maintain that at the provincial level because, quite frankly, we don't think that the federal government would have the same level of investment in those kinds of technologies as we've been able to have in Alberta. The change to the tier program was really to allow the large companies who are big payers into the program. The bitumen companies pay about $300 to $400 million a year into the program. We want them to be able to recycle that back into supporting the Pathways project. So that was the purpose, is that we know that it's going to be an expensive project. We're prepared to offer an ITC of 12% rebate on capital cost, and the changes to tier were to enable that. We also had to freeze the carbon price at $95. You'll recall Quebec's carbon trading price is only $41. So we're already well above what the carbon trading markets are showing us. And the U.S. is going in a different direction. So we've got to have a price point that makes sense to continue having the industry be viable, but also high enough that it encourages investments in those technologies. The federal government's own Canada Growth Fund, when they're doing contracts for differences, they're signing those contracts at $86.50. Our price is at $95. So we think we're in the ballpark, but those are things that are open for discussion.
The Canadian Climate Institute was at the Environment Committee yesterday, and they said, based on their conversations with some of the traders, that the market price for some of those credits, it could be as low as $65. So are you concerned that there's enough incentive for companies to reinvest in clean technology with the credit price being so low?
Well, our price is a regulated price. It's $95. And so... Well, I would say that this is part of the reason why we have a regulated environment, is because we know that we need to have a certain amount of dollars in order to make some of those investments worthwhile. And it is the case that if it gets too low, then you aren't going to have an investment. But if it gets too high, there's going to be no one to pay it because they're also going to go out of business. So you have to find where the right spot is. And we happen to think that $95 is the right spot, having talked to our industry players on that.
Hi, Premier Smith.
Hi.
McKenna from CBC. I'm just wondering what Mark Carney's reaction was to the proposal that Alberta would be a proponent of a pipeline, and I'm also wondering if the emissions cap came up in your discussion yesterday.
I can tell you, just people shouldn't be surprised that we're a proponent. I mean, every other province has been proponents of very big projects. I mean, in different provinces, I think, doesn't Doug have a plan for $200 billion that he's about to spend on electricity? And I think that you've got a similar proposal in Quebec. Our competitive advantage happens to be in the oil and gas which we own. The Resource Transfer Act transferred that to Alberta back in the 1930s. We have been hands off. We've partnered with the private sector to develop the project on our behalf. But what we've seen is that because of terrible policies for the past 10 years, we now have to step in to make sure that our product gets to market on behalf of our ratepayers. And so that's what we're doing. We hope to get it to a point where the private sector has confidence that it's going to be built. And one of the things that will give confidence is eliminating the emissions cap. We've seen a number of different analysts who have said that if you have an emissions cap that is so aggressive that you have to reach certain targets by 2030 or 2035, the companies will have to shut in by as much as 2 million barrels by 2035. So if you have to, if you're getting mixed messages, shut in 2 million barrels, you're not going to see them investing and growing it. That's why it's a partnership where we have to address the bad laws, agree to the Pathways project, as well as agree to a bitumen pipeline.
We have been listening in to Alberta's Premier, Danielle Smith, as she's speaking in Ottawa following a meeting with Prime Minister Mark Carney. And she says she also met with Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. Now, Smith, in part, said that the conversation with both leaders were somewhat similar in terms of motivation to invest in projects to advance Canada's economy. She did announce, for context, last week that Alberta plans to submit an application for a new oil pipeline, which would run to British Columbia's coast. And she announced a commitment of $14 million. Smith says she is expecting to hear something more concrete in terms of a federal response from Mark Carney by next month. We are also continuing to track this, a live look at Washington as we count down to a crucial meeting between Prime Minister Mark Carney and the U.S. President Donald Trump. The two leaders are expected to meet at the White House 1 hour from now. We will have special live coverage for you as the Carney government pushes for tariff relief. We also continue now with our coverage of the second anniversary of the October 7th Hamas-led attack on Israel. It's a solemn day of commemoration for Jews across Israel and around the world. At the same time, war is ongoing in Gaza, where death and famine have become a way of life. CBC's chief correspondent Adrienne Arsenault is in Tel Aviv today. She joins us now live. So Adrienne, let's begin with the mood in Israel today. What are you hearing there? And does it feel different on this second anniversary?
Hi there, Arthur. Absolutely feels different. Firstly, it's a holiday here, so it's quieter. But some of the quiet is fatigue, exhaustion, frustration, and a real sense of stress about, are these talks going to work? Are feet being dragged? Is the momentum real? What's going to happen? Because the preoccupation in Israel right now, and has been for the better part of 2 years, is twofold. It's healing from what happened on that day, and it is getting the hostages home. You cannot walk down a street here without seeing signs for bring them home. The pictures of the hostages stare out at you from windows of buses. They're everywhere. This is the main conversation here. If you're here and you want to know about what is happening inside Gaza, it's actually a bit hard to figure it out. You don't see it on your television screens. Al Jazeera isn't allowed to work here anymore. A lot of the Israeli outlets that used to cover the West Bank and Gaza don't. You see official IDF images, you see government statements, and then you just see Israeli stories. And I mention that because it sort of creates this continuing bubble of a conversation about the hostages and this being the number one focus. And it ends up confusing a lot of people here who say they're very frustrated when they see images around the world of people protesting, and they don't understand why people elsewhere don't understand the agony that they're going through here, waiting for the hostages to be released. And you realize that there is such a lockdown on information, that these two worlds, Gaza is 70 kilometers away, but they are worlds apart. And when you fly in here at night in particular, and you approach the coast, if you look towards Gaza, you see all the lights of Israel, and then there's this black part. If you didn't know what you're looking at, you might think, well, that's just the ocean, but it's not. It's Gaza without the power grid. But it seems to be just missing from the air. And on the ground, it also seems to be missing editorially. So you have this feeling here of fear, anxiety, trauma, exhaustion, singularly focused on getting the hostages home, debating whether the government here has done enough, and then just hoping that these peace talks, which are fairly secretive at the moment, actually elicit change.
And now, Adrienne, peace negotiations, of course, one part of this story, peace negotiations are still underway in Egypt today. So what's the latest on the progress on that front?
So a couple of things to keep in mind. Very little information is coming out. These are very secretive talks. We know that yesterday was all about listening. Today is about a little bit more of talking itself. We understand from Egyptian media that Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff from the United States have now arrived. That may signal some momentum. It is being reported that 3 of the Hamas representatives who are there are 3 of the men who were targeted in that Israeli airstrike in Qatar not that long ago. So imagine the tone at that table. There's momentum because there may not be any such thing in the world really as allies, just countries with allied interests. And right now the allied interests are that this war get solved. So that momentum is behind them. The details are extremely difficult, even the details on when the hostages come out, which prisoners come out, who withdraws to what line and when. Those are just the top lines of the negotiations, and those too are difficult right now.
And Adrienne, you've also been speaking with survivors from the Nova Music Festival on October 7th. What are they telling you?
We've been talking to them since October 7, 2023, a bit last year, more this week. Couple of things. I mean, they are constantly coming to terms with the fact that they survived, but surviving doesn't necessarily mean thriving. They're being studied by neuroscientists, particularly the Nova Music Festival. It turns out it was probably the largest grouping of people ever to experience a mass trauma while on different drugs, like ecstasy, for example. So they're trying to figure out if some of those drugs helped them cope in the moment and have helped with their trauma. And early responses are, it's possible it did. And if they can figure that out, maybe they can figure out how to heal trauma going forward. If that happens, one contribution to healing trauma, that will be something that interests the world over, particularly will interest the people in Gaza who are still going through this, don't have time to study trauma in Gaza, they're just trying to endure it. But any research that comes out of here about how to help people cope is going to be needed worldwide, because humans are very good at hurting each other and not so good at healing.
Adrian, thank you for this. That is CBC News Chief Correspondent Adrian Arsenault. And you'll want to be sure to tune in to The National tonight as Adrian leads our coverage of the 2-year anniversary from Tel Aviv. That begins right here on CBC News Network at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. We were just discussing that ceasefire talks are giving the families of the remaining hostages hope of reuniting soon. As for families whose loved ones were returned under previous deals, the fight doesn't end. They continue to advocate for the return of all remaining hostages. And one of those people is my next guest, Jonathan Dekel-Chen. His son, Sagi, was released from Hamas captivity in February of this year. He joins us now. Jonathan, thank you for making time for us today.
Thank you for having me.
You know, first, I do want to ask you, on this day, of course, and there is so much trauma attached to the October 7th date, I'm wondering how your son is doing and how your family is coping on this day.
Well, on the one hand, perhaps the most obvious is that we're all incredibly grateful that Sagi emerged from the hellholes of Gaza after 500 days in the worst possible place one could imagine. But at the same time, he would say himself, as do all of the former hostages, that they will never really be free. They will never be able to carry on with their lives until all of the hostages, the remaining 48, are home. And of those 48, 9 community, kibbutz Nir Oz. And so for us, that trauma is ongoing. And if I may, I want to offer a small correction to what your reporter spoke of. It is true that the Israeli mainstream media has not been giving wide coverage of the destruction and the suffering in Gaza. That is true. However, Israelis are worldly enough to be quite aware of the degree of that suffering in Gaza. You would be hard-pressed to find many Israelis who don't wish the war to be over, but we all understand that the only way that that can happen is with return of all of the hostages. So there is a connection here. There is something of a media mainstream bubble, but Israelis are aware, and the call, you need to know this, the call to get the hostages home is equally a call to end this madness that has been going on now for far too long inside of Gaza, that brings the suffering of millions of Gazans, and truly they are captives of Hamas almost as much as our loved ones are.
You know, part of the broad conversation here, too, of course, is the fact that those families like yours who have seen your loved ones returned are still working very much in cooperation, in connection with people who still have their loved ones held in captivity. And I know that you and I actually spoke, I believe, during the first hostage exchange. And I remember that conversation in particular because you had said that you knew, especially because it was women and the elderly who might have been among the first, that your son would not be part of that, and how you were trying to cope with that reality. We do have images, of course, of you finally reuniting with Sagi and with his wife. And I'm wondering what that moment was like.
It was the rebirth of, at that moment, a 37-year-old son. 36-year-old son at that moment. We didn't know which Sagi would be coming home to us. The one that had been taken on October 7th, or someone so damaged by physical and spiritual injuries during nearly 500 days of captivity that those moments were incredibly stressful. For me personally, the second that I saw him in person in a hospital in a military base in the south of Israel, I knew that despite the injuries that he had sustained and the hellish conditions under which he and all the other hostages were held, I saw in his eyes that it was going to be okay, because Sagi has always spoken with his eyes since he was a little boy. And I knew that it was going to be okay. Again, once he'll really only heal, however, when all of the people that he left behind are home.
And of course, that we know is still a work in progress. And of course, we know that it is intense work, and especially intensely focused on by families just like yours. I'm wondering, when we talk about it, though, at the government level, these conversations, these ceasefire talks that are happening right now, how are you feeling about how the Israeli government, the counterparts who are negotiating in Qatar, the United States, how they're all coming together to try to end this war and return those hostages?
Well, for better or worse, on October 8th, 2023, nearly 2 years ago, I believe, because of my familiarity with this Israeli government, that the only way our hostages, and at that time there were over 240 hostages, the only way any hostages were coming home alive, if at all, would be through direct and extreme pressure from the Oval Office, whoever inhabited at first President Biden and now President Trump. And I think events have borne that out over the course of the two or three rounds of hostage release. So at the moment, it does seem, given President Trump's statements, given what seems to be a commitment by many Arab states and Turkey, to getting this done, that the ability of Hamas and the Israeli government, to be perfectly honest, to torpedo this peace, this ceasefire and hostage release, their maneuvering room is limited, but it's there. So from the very start, I tried not to ride the emotional roller coaster of, it's seemingly headed towards resolution, then to be disappointed again and again. I think it's imperative. Canada doesn't have a big part to play in this, but nonetheless, that all good-willed people do what they can, if it's governments, institutions, or individuals, do what they can, not just to pressure Israel and to condemn Israel, which, in some senses I can understand, but also with the complete understanding that this horror in Gaza ends, or it can end, only by Hamas releasing these hostages. And so I want to be cautiously optimistic at this moment, but extreme pressure needs to be applied on both sides until this is done.
Jonathan, I want to thank you so much for your time and for joining us on this day. We appreciate it. That is Jonathan Dekel-Chen, and we appreciate your time again.
Thank you for having me.
And stay with us, because coming up, we will also speak to an aid organization on the ground in Gaza. You're watching CBC News Network. The humanitarian situation in Gaza keeps deteriorating. Many organizations continue to call for more essential aid to get into the war-torn Palestinian territory. The UN says it allocated $9 million US to keep hospitals, water systems, bakeries, and other critical services operating. A UN spokesperson says their aid teams are, quote, ready to go if a ceasefire plan is reached. Right now, indirect talks between Israel and Hamas are underway. For more on the situation on the ground in Gaza, I'm joined now by Yusra Abu Sharek. She is a programs coordinator with the International Network for Aid, Relief and Assistance. Yusra, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
First, I'm hoping that you can give us a picture of the situation on the ground on this October 7th, almost 2 years since, of course, this has begun.
Yeah. Actually, on the ground, the situation is very catastrophic and indescribable when it comes to talking about negotiation and ceasefire planning. Still on the ground, there is no change. Families are still facing fear of death under very intense bombardment, continuing airstrikes and other kinds of ground operations. On the other side, in South Gaza Strip, people are in dire need for every single item, from shelter, tents, food, water, and protection as well. The other day, I met a family who were sleeping in the streets for 4 days after they left Gaza City without anything on top of their heads. And the mother had teenage girls, and they walk for at least 20 minutes just to use the toilet. So the situation either way is indescribable. And as we are enduring these catastrophic conditions for 2 years, we, as a humanitarian aid workers and national workers who have been experiencing this, we feel how deep the pain is now. Like we are uprooted from the memories that we lost and the losses that we experienced at the beginning of the war, from like destroying our houses, from leaving our neighborhoods, or experiencing the hunger and the famine. Until now, thousands of people and especially like patients and children are suffering from the impact of the famine. Until now, they don't have any access to their very basic needs of food. So, and most importantly, that we are about to start the third academic year where children in Gaza Strip are losing their formal and in-person education. So the trauma in children, in parents, everyone in Gaza Strip is very deep and complex. And it's time to take serious and timely actions to stop all the suffering in all means and ways.
Yusra, I'm wondering, because it's not only, of course, we always ask you this question, because not only do you wear the hat of an aid worker, but you're also a mother with your children living in Gaza right now. And so I'm wondering how you have those discussions with them about how this is continuing and how the situation has not improved, and what sort of hopes you have for a potential ceasefire.
Yes, like regarding my special experience with my children, is during the latest displacement, my son told me, "Hey, Mom, whenever I started to have connections and friends at any area that we are displaced to, another displacement order is disseminated. So what the life would like to be for us, please take us out from Gaza Strip." So how, as a mother, would I feel answering their questions regarding the continuing displacement and losing their network and support system? On top of that, my other son kept convincing me to leave Gaza City because he couldn't sleep day and night due to the continuing bombardment and the scary situation that he was experiencing. So either way, we hold up on hope, and convincing them just to be empathetic and to keep these values, because the majority of Palestinians in Gaza started to lose their beliefs and values in humanity and human rights. So I want my children to grow up believing in these values. The other day, I asked my son to help a girl lifting up and carrying 2 jerrycans, very heavy jerrycans. And he walked for 15 minutes and came back saying, "Oh, it was so exhausting, Mom." And I said, "Yes, but you did a great job." Just because I wanted him to be empathetic, despite of all the harsh and very failing conditions that they are going through.
Yusra, I want to thank you so much for your time and for giving us an account from the ground. That is Yusra Abu Sharek. She is a programs coordinator with the International Network for Aid, Relief and Assistance. Thank you. And a reminder of our top story today. In less than an hour, Prime Minister Mark Carney will pay a visit to the White House. The focus, the trade war with the United States. CBC's senior business reporter Peter Armstrong will speak to us about how the U.S. economy is increasingly taking a hit from Donald Trump's tariffs. That's next on the CBC News Network. Prime Minister Mark Carney is in Washington today for a face-to-face meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump at the White House. Many Canadian businesses are hoping Carney can achieve relief from Trump's punishing tariffs. But it's not just Canada that wants to see a positive outcome. Trump is also under pressure from American industries who are feeling the weight of his tariffs. And to talk about all of that, CBC senior business correspondent Peter Armstrong joins me now. Of course, we're talking about how it's not only Canada, there's stress on the American side too when it comes to the economy.
There are, and there are interesting little signs of stress in the American economy, right? Like every industry association in the country is now asking for bailouts. Previously, it was asking for carve-outs. They're still asking for carve-outs. We're expecting this week, as early as this week, to get some kind of a bailout for American soybean farmers. Now, they've been caught up in the trade war with China, but it's all one big picture to anybody who's actually caught up in this mess. But it's going to be like we have heard as low as $15 billion, as high as $50 billion just for American farmers. We're hearing about carve-outs for the auto industry. Jim Farley is the CEO of Ford. Was at an event last week and said something that really stood out to me. He was asked about the tariffs, and he said, it's frustrating because we're the most American auto company. We export the most, and yet we have this $2 billion headwind, which prevents me from investing even more in the U.S. So the stuff that was being said quietly, the stuff that was being sort of sent quietly to the president is now being said quite openly out loud to say, look, these tariffs, this trade war is hurting American businesses. You'll remember, Arthi, we were going through this in 2017 and 18 and 19 in the first Trump presidency, and they had to come up with all of these supports and all of these bailouts and all of these carve-outs. So I think this is all just part of that, but is really starting to build now.
And of course, there's a lot of talk about what the objective is here, whether it's steel tariffs or aluminum tariffs or a greater package. You know, we know that the outlook is being tempered by the Canadian side. What happens if this continues on? How long does this go?
Well, I mean, it can go. And I think we know quite almost intuitively at this point, we've talked about it so much, what that would mean for the Canadian economy, down to the decimal point of where we'd be at in GDP and jobs and such. We don't have a very clear picture of what this will mean for the American economy because we're getting all this contradicting information, right? We've got GDP numbers are actually showing up pretty good in the United States, right? They had a revision in the last quarter that showed things came in, I think, at 3.8%. It's solid. But if you look at the jobs numbers, they're starting to show real weakness. If you look at consumer confidence, that's starting to show some real weakness. You look at people's sense of where the economy is going. Is it better now than it was, and is it going to be better now than it is? Those numbers are all falling. So the sense that this is working is starting to come a little bit undone. Where that goes from here, I think, is anybody's guess. But that, too, is going to build pressure around the president and around pushing for a change in the trade policy.
Well, we'll have to see what comes out of all of this and down the line. Thank you, as always, for your analysis. That is the CBC senior business correspondent, Peter Armstrong. Thanks, Peter. And you are looking live now at Washington, at the White House. Prime Minister Mark Carney and U.S. President Donald Trump will sit down next hour in the Oval Office. We know trade and tariffs are no doubt at the top of Carney's agenda. We will have special coverage for you of this meeting. Our eyes are on the White House right now. Reporters standing by. Our chief political correspondent, Rosemary Barton, along with host of Power and Politics, David Cochrane, are taking over coverage now.
This is a CBC News special presentation.
Hello there and welcome to our CBC News special coverage. I'm Rosemary Barton. Prime Minister Mark Carney is back in Washington and set to meet with the U.S. President at the White House this hour. It is their second time face-to-face inside the Oval Office in less than 6 months. Sources tell CBC News there is some hope, and I stress the word some, to get some tariff relief as U.S. tariffs wreak havoc on multiple Canadian industries and cause all sorts of problems for the Canadian economy. Let me show you a live shot of Washington, D.C. We are waiting for the Prime Minister's arrival at that door at the White House in about 30 minutes' time, more or less. The second time he's making this visit. We understand the invitation came about at the request of the President, but certainly the Prime Minister has lots of things to say to the President today. Joining me, of course, in our coverage is the host of Power and Politics, David Cochrane. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thanks for letting me visit your studio.
It's always good to have a big crowd at the table.
What are you hearing? What are you expecting?
You know, the people you speak with on this are doing a pretty strong job of trying to manage expectations, mostly because they have no idea what to expect. You're in your negotiations. You're dealing with your counterpart in the U.S. government, in the U.S. Trade Representative's office. Subject matter experts in the Commerce Department. None of those people have the authority to make a final decision. The only person in the United States of America who can make the final call on anything of real consequence is Donald Trump. So until you go into that Oval Office, Rosie, and until you hear it from the president himself and he gives direction to all of his people that, yeah, this is something I'm willing to live with, nothing matters up to that point. So they don't really know how this is going to go. The invitation, as I understand it, came from the president to the prime minister directly in New York at the UN General Assembly on the sidelines, as they say, at that summit, essentially saying, why don't you come to the White House for a visit? And that's how this happened. Now, there's been some suggestion from sources that there's an expectation that maybe there could be relief on steel. The word that was used in my conversations was there's the potential for relief on steel. It sounds like a fine point, but it's the difference between being hopeful and being optimistic. I hope something happens, but I'm not optimistic it's going to happen. I think that's kind of where they are going into this.
And steel and aluminum, probably the hardest hit sector at this stage? I
Well,
would say at
50%
least from a 50,
tariff on steel. And just the
perspective.
structure of the industry, the type of products they make, a lot of it is purpose-built for the U.S. market. So it takes real time to tool up and change, basically even like the electricity systems in some of the steel processing facilities to be able to function at a lower capacity level. So they are the industry that has largely been bleeding out, to be quite blunt, and it's the one that needs the most help. And if not relief, certainty.
Right.
Is this what we're dealing with from now on? What do we need to do to adapt?
Then that is kind of the other part of the expectation, not getting rid of all tariffs, but perhaps at least lowering them and then knowing what it'll look like going forward. As we've been saying, the Prime Minister and the President know each other, of course. They've met before, but they also text and call on a pretty regular basis from what we understand. So that sort of defines a little bit what you're going to see inside the Oval Office. The CBC's Katie Simpson, of course, joins us now from the White House. She's been doing lots of this reporting from her end. And Katie, what are you hearing about the expectations and the likelihood that the Prime Minister walks away with something today?
I think David really framed it in the best sort of way here, is that conversations I've been having, conversations our colleagues at Radio Canada have been having, are that, you know, there is an expectation, but there is a difference between the word expectation and guarantee. And you're going into an environment that is unpredictable, it is volatile. Donald Trump is the final decision maker here. And something that's different this go around in, you know, the current Trump administration versus what Canada was dealing with the first time around when they were renegotiating the North American Free Trade Agreement. If they had sign-off from someone at below a level below Trump, someone like Robert Lighthizer, who is the U.S. Trade Representative, if they had sign-off from someone in the cabinet, Canada could count on that as a done deal. It would go to the president and things would go ahead. Things are very different this time. I am told by multiple sources. Essentially, Canadians for months now have been having conversations at all kinds of different levels with members of the Trump administration. And what happens is that those, whatever the conversations are and whatever Canada can sort of like pitch to these Americans who are within the Trump administration, that is then pitched to the president. And there are different competing factions within the White House trying to get the president's attention and trying to point him in a certain direction. And so it's much tougher this go around, certainly, and the sources that I've been speaking with really wanted to temper expectation, but there was that little bit of something there that they were comfortable enough using the word expectation. But again, I want to stress very, very clearly here, expectation was stressed to us, not guarantee. So that's sort of the framing of this. And that's just kind of what this moment is like in America. It's not just Canada that's dealing with this. Every world leader that comes into the Oval Office, the big concern is you might be dealing with a challenge in this moment. What are you going to do? Are you afraid you're going to make it worse? Hey, and guys, you see behind me? There go all the Canadians, all the Canadian reporters. I will join you in 1 Canadian minute, my friend. So that's the Canadian delegation of reporters getting ready to head on into the Oval Office, which is a sign that Prime Minister Mark Carney is probably going to be coming over shortly. One thing I want to tell our viewers, so the timing is set for like 11:30 for when he's supposed to arrive. The way it works here at the White House, I've yet to see one of these things go on time with any world leader. The way it works is the White House sends a signal to the Canadian delegation, okay, bring him over, and then the Canadian or the world leader comes on over, and then they come on in. Again, don't be shocked if it starts a little bit late. I know that was a case the first time. that is generally the case with all the world leaders that are coming through. So like I wouldn't necessarily read into that if things get off to a bit of a slower start here. But that's sort of where things are right now. The flag is up, the Canadian flag's up over at Blair House, which is the official guest residence of the United States president. And so again, it's just waiting for that signal from Mark Carney to come on over and get this show on the road.
Okay, Katie Simpson at the White House. We will let you go, catch up with your colleagues, and come back to you, of course, through our coverage here. Again, we are standing by for Mark Carney to arrive in the next 20 minutes or so. His second time at the Oval Office. Again, not an invitation you would turn down to try and get a little bit of FaceTime with the president and make your case both publicly when there'll be that spray of cameras in the Oval Office at the beginning, and then privately through a working lunch. William Pellerin is an international trade lawyer, and he joins us now in studio. Nice to see you.
Great being here.
I'm asking everyone the same question. I'll ask it to you as well in terms of your expectation of outcomes today.
Real hope, certainly for us, for our clients, for Canadian and North American businesses generally. I think it's going to be a tough one. I don't think we're going to get to some grandiose deal that's going to solve everything for everyone. Perhaps some sort of relief for the steel industry that we'll get a signal on today, whether they sign or it's just a general statements. I think they'll take it at this point. I think there's still going to be quite a bit of problems for other sectors of the economy that are unlikely to get relief today. I'm talking about, the kitchen cabinet sector, the furniture sector, softwood lumber, others that are getting hammered and will have new tariffs applied to them as of next week already. So it's unlikely that those folks will see relief today. And it's not clear what Canada is willing to give up at this point, either to get a small deal on steel, even if it is very meaningful for some of the steel
Because
producers.
we have already walked away from a series of things, both the counter tariffs, the digital services tax. You talked, before we started the show, you were talking about quotas for steel, and I just wonder if you could break down a little bit what that could look like, just so we have it in our minds as the day unfolds.
So I think that's potentially a likely outcome today, whether they sign it today or in the next few weeks, but where the United States and Canada could agree to a certain volume of steel that comes from Canada to the United States that isn't subject to a tariff, and then only after that volume is exhausted does the tariff kick in. Right. So Canada has a number of these tariff rate quotas, TRQs they're called, that limit the amount of product that can come in, but does provide some relief. And so I think that would be quite welcome. You could structure that based on historical volumes, for example, to still give some protection to the U.S. steel industry if that's what the president wants.
Which would allow for some predictability for
Correct.
the Canadian industry.
That's right.
I want to play a little clip of an interview that the Prime Minister did with The Economist. I believe it was last week. They just released a little bit of it. But in one of the excerpts, he talks clearly about how he thinks Trump views trade. And I wouldn't mind your perspective on that, William, after. Take a listen.
He has a view that you measure economic success in trade, just like you measure success in business, of whether or not you have positive cash flow. And so for him, running a trade surplus is a sign of success. And if you're running a deficit, you, by definition, are either being ripped off or you're not as successful as you need to be. We take a different view.
So, I mean, I don't think that's surprising that we know that Donald Trump has an issue with trade deficits and trade surpluses, but what do you make of the Prime Minister's assessment of how the president looks at trade?
Yeah, I think that's to be expected. I mean, the Prime Minister views this from the lens of his economics background, which is frankly the right way to think about it. I mean, I run a trade deficit with my grocery store all the time, right? I mean, that should not be a surprise to anybody, and it's not a problem, right?
A big one these days.
A very large one, absolutely. So looking at it from the balance sheet style when you're talking about global economies is not the right way of looking about it, but it's very interesting that the Prime Minister is willing to say that and is not shy about that statement.
Yeah, and it's also something that clearly the president believes is working in terms of an approach for the American economy. Do you want to ask anything?
William, I just wonder, like, the language going into this was the potential for some sort of movement and change on steel tariffs. If it's not a reduction in the rate, does it, even like a certainty of what the industry has to deal with for a period of time, does that help in any way? Like, because I know in our conversations, the snip, snap change in what was happening with tariffs was a shock as people had to recalibrate and redo things. Would just knowing if it's, I don't know, if it drops to 30% and it's going to stay there, that's the best it can do, does that help someone navigate these things?
I think for certain players it might. I think for the largest players that are hit with the large tariff now at 50, knowing that they're stuck at 50 for a long period of time is not going to help, because that's the worst case scenario. I think if there's some relief and they could go to 30 and they could plan, maybe that's sufficient. I think we're seeing, in fact, we know that steel prices in the United States have skyrocketed. They are going up significantly. Published pricing is going up. And so a lot of the American purchasers are eating the tariffs across a variety of steel products. I think that where it becomes a bit more of a problem and beneficial, to your point, for some players, is where the goods are not yet subject to tariffs, because the tariff list on what is a steel good actually keeps shifting. And the U.S. keeps increasing and broadening what is a steel good that will be subject to these 50% tariffs. And we saw that even just a couple of weeks ago, where that list got larger.
Yeah. Well, these are the challenges too, right? Like across the steel sector, obviously they want to get rid of the tariffs, but there's a different tolerance level for what threshold they can sustain, and you know, across all sectors there's a different tariff tolerance and a willingness to deal with a quota. So that makes negotiating a one-size-fits-all more difficult. But this spike in the steel prices in the U.S., is there also supply challenges there? Because I wonder if that is the argument Mark Carney can make, that, you know, the steel and aluminum tariffs are nominally about national security, but really it's about economic security for the president. And if they're cutting off their own supplies, does that then become a leverage point that they can make with the U.S. at the table there?
So I would say that's probably the case for certain sectors, maybe more so for aluminum.
Auto, for example, would need
it. And autos, absolutely. I think steel, less so. There's such a global oversupply of steel from China, but every other country around the world. There's just too much steel being produced, whether it's Austria or other countries even. And so I think that probably less. Everyone just has to pay the tariff. The product is still being made, and ultimately there's just not enough in the United States to sustain the demand. So it is leading to rising prices.
Rosie, just one final point, to temper our optimism. As of right now, as we understand it, there is no plan for the Prime Minister to speak today after the meeting, and that's a signal potentially of where this could go, right?
Okay, thanks for that. Thank you, William Pellerin. Appreciate you being here. This is, as we've been talking about, the Prime Minister's second visit to the White House. So what progress has been made, if any, since his last visit? Let's take a look. It was back in May that the newly elected Canadian Prime Minister met with U.S. President Donald Trump in the Oval Office. Lots of stress and pressure on that meeting. On June 3rd, Trump signed an executive order announcing an increase on tariffs on steel and aluminum from all countries except the UK, as we've been talking about, raising those tariffs from 25% to 50%. And on June 29th, that same month, the Prime Minister announced that the digital services tax would be canceled in order to resume trade talks, which had been somewhat stalled in part because of that tax. On August 1st, Trump raised tariffs to 35% on Canadian goods not protected by CUSMA. So most things are still okay, but he raised those another 10%. And then August 29th, the Prime Minister announced that Canada would lift nearly all retaliatory counter tariffs on U.S. goods. That was also in a bid to get negotiations and talks starting again. And then on October 14th, as we've been discussing here, 1 week from today, the president is set to impose another 10% tariff on lumber, a new 25% tariff on cabinets and furniture, meaning the softwood tariff, I think, would be up then to 45%, if I'm not mistaken, when that happens on October 14th. And then, of course, just last night, the promise or the threat of a new tariff on November 1st on heavy-duty trucks, which we were all trying to figure out what exactly that meant last night. So those are the stakes. That's how things look right now. But given that came out in a social media post just last night from the president, obviously things can change very rapidly. And whether they change or not today is part of what we'll be watching. Jean Charest is a member of the Prime Minister's Council on Canada-U.S. Relations and, of course, former Premier of Quebec. Nice to see you, Mr. Charest.
Nice to see you, Rosemary.
Okay, I'll start with the same question everybody's getting there. What are your expectations today? Do you think we'll see any progress at all?
Well, in the description of events, there is one other thing that has happened that's significant, is that the Americans have pulled the trigger that they needed to pull on the consultations for the renewal of CUSMA.
Right.
This is the trade agreement between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And And they took their time to do that, and that is significant, if only for one reason. The main objective of the government of Canada is to protect that trade agreement, which allows, somewhere in the range of 90% of all the merchandise that goes back and forth to go back and forth without a tariff. And then the other thing we have to take into account in regards to Canada's relationship with the United States, which is different from Europe or South Korea or Japan, is that our supply chains are so intertwined that to undo that would cost billions of dollars and take a number of years to do, Rosemary. And the American side, from every signal that we have received, understands that. They do get that. They're not going to say that out loud, but they get it. The consequences of not having a deal with Canada are much more severe to the American economy than for any other partner, Canada and Mexico, and maybe China apart from that. But so that's what the context is about. The consultations are happening now. That is good news. So we're on track to a renewal without being sure, by the way, of what exactly the Americans will be asking for. We know on autos, they'll probably be asking for a higher American content.
Yeah.
But that's where we need to focus our energy. In the meantime, steel, aluminum, softwood lumber, now trucks, these are the major irritants for which, if we were able to have some short-term relief, I'm thinking in terms of quota systems, for example, which is not ideal for any of us, but at least would be better than having a straight 50% tariff. And also making the case that this is hurting the American economy. The auto sector in the United States is suffering from the tariffs on steel and aluminum right now. They're the ones who have to make our case about changing that to something that's more reasonable than what we have now.
What do you think is given that I guess the focus is really on the sectoral tariffs, because that is the most punishing for the Canadian economy, what is the easiest one to solve? Is it steel and aluminum, or is there something else where the Canadian government would be focusing its attention?
Steel is pretty straightforward. It could be a quota system where you establish a threshold, and when you reach that threshold, the tariff kicks in. If you negotiate it the right way, you'll negotiate a level of exports that will never trigger the threshold. And steel, that sounds pretty straightforward. Right. Aluminum, much more complicated. And for the Americans, much more complicated. It takes 10 years to build an aluminum smelter. It costs billions of dollars. They are suffering from their own tariff right now. And I don't think a quota system would work for them on aluminum. And then you get softwood lumber, where again, they're hurting their own economy because they cannot supply the amount of lumber they need to be able to build houses. And we've done quotas before in the softwood lumber story, which is a recurring movie between Canada and the United States for the last 40 years. And so a quota system could also be put in place. It's not ideal, but at least it's better than having a straight tariff.
From just putting on your former politician hat for a moment, if the Prime Minister doesn't get something to point to today that he might be able to call a win, I do wonder how complicated this becomes for him. You know, he was largely elected on a promise to be able to handle this situation, and we can argue that the things he's doing broadly domestically are in part a response to the president. But if he comes back empty-handed after another Oval Office visit, I don't know what you think, how you think that plays out for him. Surely that can't be good.
Well, it's all relative, because all of us watch Donald Trump every single day. And every single day brings a new set of issues, Rosemary. So yes, we'd all like to see immediate results. We're on track to renegotiating CUSMA, which is good news. But at the same time, we're dealing with Donald Trump. And also add to that it isn't only dealing with Donald Trump that is part of his mandate. Redesigning the Canadian economy is also now a big part of it. And that means dealing with taxes, deregulation, size of government, dealing with the provinces and practicing federalism differently. So he's having to do this do all of this at the same time, plus diversifying our trade, whether it's Europe, Asia, or the Middle East. So having to do all of this simultaneously is very demanding. And in the case of Donald Trump, we'd all like to have results, but you know what? We're dealing with Donald Trump.
Jean Charest, always nice to chat with you and to see you. Thank you for making the time this morning. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, we are standing by for the Prime Minister's arrival there within the next 10 minutes or so. Although Katie warned us, these things can run late, but that is the door where he is going to arrive for his second meeting with the U.S. president at the White House, because, of course, they've met in other contexts at the G7, at the United Nations a week or so ago. But this is the second time the Prime Minister will be there inside the Oval Office, and then a working lunch with some of his cabinet ministers and chief of staff to see if they can make any progress on trade talks, but also security, which is another piece of the conversation that the Prime Minister often mentions when he's talking about this. The CBC's Willie Lowry joins me now from Washington with to give us a sense, Willie, of how this is going to unfold.
Absolutely, Rosie. Well, first of all, in the 5 months and a day that it's been since Prime Minister Mark Carney was here at the White House, a lot has changed. President Donald Trump has not just overhauled the U.S. government, he's also been busy at work at his first love, real estate, redoing basically the Oval Office. So Mark Carney will walk into an Oval Office that's a lot more gold. He also might have the opportunity to tour the construction site that is the much anticipated ballroom. All morning we've seen backhoes busy at work constructing that. But again, you know, I've heard a lot of talk about the Canadian perspective, about tariffs, but another important subject that will likely be addressed this morning are the wars in Ukraine and Gaza. Of course, it is October 7th today. The two leaders, Prime Minister Carney, of course, endorsed President Trump's 20-point peace plan for Gaza, but they don't see eye to eye on a really important point, and that is, of course, the recognition of a Palestinian state, something that President Trump was really irate that Canada and other Western countries chose to recognize at the United Nations General Assembly just last month. So lots of thorny issues even outside of trade that could arise this in, well, just 20 minutes or so.
Okay, Willie Lowry there in Washington. Thank you for that. I appreciate it very much. That is a good point Willie makes there. It is, of course, the second anniversary of the attacks on October 7th. And Donald Trump's mind may well be elsewhere as he waits to see if a peace and a ceasefire can take hold in the Middle East. He is the one driving that plan. And so that may also come up in that conversation, and certainly Canada's position on a Palestinian state as well. Brian Clow is the former Deputy Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Nice to see you this morning, Brian.
Good to be here.
Maybe I'll just start on that point. When the president is distracted or has bigger fish to fry, as the case may be, I wonder how hard it is to get him to focus on Canadian concerns, whether it be for, you know, just a couple of hours or not. And secondly, whether the decision by Canada, along with other countries like the UK and France, to recognize Palestine as a state might be something that the president decides he wants to bring up in the Oval Office directly to the Prime Minister.
It is definitely an issue. It's something the president cares a lot about, and I could very much see it coming up. In fact, I'd be surprised if it doesn't. And not just the president. Howard Lutnick considers himself to be the pro-Israel champion within this administration, and they clearly don't like what the Canadian government did. And to the broader point and to your question, these conversations with Donald Trump in meetings like this, they tend to go all over the place. And so my advice to the government, and I'm sure they're prepared for this, is you do have to pull the conversation back to what you want to be talking about. And in this case, it's trade and tariffs.
Yeah, of course, the fact that it's the second anniversary of those attacks, I think it will be addressed in some way, whether it's the president admonishing the prime minister or something else. And there was a lot of stress and pressure around the prime minister the first time around in that Oval Office, because it had happened just shortly after President Zelensky had been there and had been, frankly, berated by the president. And I think there was a conclusion that the prime minister walked away fairly unscathed from that meeting. And I wonder, Brian, because your former boss didn't have the same kind of relationship with the president, how you might expect it to play this time around.
I think Mark Carney has shown that he is very much able to handle this president and handle those situations. At G7, the first Oval Office visit went more than fine in that respect, and I fully expect today to be just fine on that front as well.
I want to play a little clip for you and for our audience. Again, part of an interview that the Prime Minister gave to The Economist. And it's a fairly positive assessment of the President, but I think it gives some insight into perhaps their relationship too. Take a listen to this.
He's decisive, and he has an ability to change the dynamic very quickly on, whether it's with respect to Ukraine, peace in the Middle East, global trade, and beyond. So you can understand, it's absolutely clear why he's leader of the United States. I mean, you put together all those qualities.
Yeah. And Brian, I think I'm just going to point out to our viewers that the flags have arrived, the Canadian and American flags, so perhaps the Prime Minister arriving shortly as well. But Brian, I think that assessment is interesting because it does indicate to me, at any rate, that the Prime Minister has a fairly good understanding of Donald Trump as a human being as well as a leader.
Yeah, and what you see there is the Prime Minister employing a proven tactic when talking about the President, engaging this President. Flattery helps. Having a good relationship is clearly a good thing, a positive relationship, but it's nowhere near enough to move the dial on some of these policy issues. President Trump believes strongly in his tariff policy, and that's why I think we're certainly not going to see some sort of comprehensive deal today or in the next few days. I'm hopeful we can get movement on some tariffs. Steel looks like the most likely. But I'm also quite confident, as you have observed and others, it may not be done just yet, and the meeting itself may be the thing to close this off and get that deal done for today.
And so if we don't see an outcome today, what should we be thinking? That to your point, that there are still sort of lower level talks that have to happen? Because a Prime Minister doesn't, of course you want FaceTime with the President, but a Prime Minister doesn't generally go down to the White House if he doesn't have some goal in mind or some hope of an outcome, I would expect.
I think that's true in normal circumstances and, for lack of a better word, with a normal president. With this president, you've got to get in front of him and talk to him and try to sort things out, either on the phone or in person. I'll give you an example. In early February, when Justin Trudeau was facing the 25% fentanyl tariff, which eventually was applied, but in early February, the Trump administration announced it was going to be applied. The two of them got on the phone twice in one day, at sometimes very heated conversations. And by the end of that phone call, Donald Trump agreed to a 30-day pause. And that is what Mark Carney could be walking into today. They may not have the deal done to move a tariff, or lower a tariff, I should say. And we'll see over the course of those 45 minutes when the two are together if they can actually come to an outcome.
That was an awfully good example. I'll just end on this. The fact that the Prime Minister dialed back some of Canada's response, notably their counter tariffs, which others had not put in place, but Canada did, and walked away from the digital services tax as an attempt to sort of unblock talks, because it did seem as though they were stalled. How significant do you think those moves would be in terms of getting Donald Trump's respect and attention?
I think they were necessary when they happened because the president was seemingly prepared to inflict more pain on Canada if Mark Carney didn't make those decisions. Yeah. But I also think they're now in the past, and Canada is going to have to come up with new things, unfortunately to a certain extent, to win over the president on. That's not to say we don't have leverage and don't have tools. We do. All of the massive new defense spending that we're committing to, American companies want access to that, and that's a point of leverage for Canada.
Okay, Brian Clow, always nice to see you. Thank you for making the time for us. Appreciate it. All right, let's come back in studio as we wait for the Prime Minister to arrive any moment now there at the White House for his second meeting with the President at the White House, David Cochrane and William Pellerin. David, I'll go to you.
Yeah, Brian has some interesting insight there because obviously working in the Trudeau PMO and with Chrystia Freeland during the first round of NAFTA negotiations and, having been in the White House many times in meetings with the Trump administration. But, on the elbows down policy decisions, to use the sort of the political term, you can't leave irritants in place with this president, right? You kind of have to adopt a Hippocratic Oath approach to these conversations that, first of all, do no harm. And, they were finding that the counter tariffs were an irritant at the table because they were applied on CUSMA-compliant goods when the U.S. tariffs were not applied on CUSMA-compliant goods, with, of course, the exception of the sectoral ones. And then there was the dropping even beyond that because, the Prime Minister did come out and say we are matching the U.S. And it turns out, Kate McKenna found an order in council that shows that they went beyond it. The explanation, apparently, is that it would have cost more to administer than what you would collect. Right. And so it just became, the juice wasn't worth the squeeze on the administrative side. Not communicated, though, not explained. But these are steps that I don't know if a digital services tax, capital gains inclusion tax, all these other things that Mark Carney has gotten rid of are policies he would have ever advanced had he been in government beforehand. But, you have things on the table in a negotiation to be able to take them off the table, to either keep talks moving or to make progress. And as Brian, accurately pointed out, and as Jean Charest said, you're dealing with Donald Trump. There's an unpredictability and a volatility here that it's hard to apply even conventional, rational, political, and economic analysis because they just do not work in that world.
And William, Brian also mentioned points of leverage for Canada. He pointed to $9 billion in defense spending. The F-35 review would be another aspect of that. The Prime Minister has yet to make a decision on whether that's going beyond the order that's already been placed. Where do you see points of leverage for Canada?
Yeah, I think that's the main ones are probably anything to do with defense, security, and China. And China's the boogeyman in the background here. For years, we've been going down to the United States and meeting with U.S. trade lawyers, and every conversation has always been around China and decoupling and the general relationship there. And so the Prime Minister Trudeau, of course, imposed the EV surtax on Chinese autos, Chinese tariffs on steel, but the United States would like Canada to go further in that respect and really pick a camp, right? And so there's this kind of global trend of what country is falling in which camp. And that's a very difficult conversation to have. And we have our own trade irritants with China right now with respect to canola and seafood and other sectors also. And every time we do something to go further into Camp USA, China retaliates, and that hurts, Canadian farmers in certain situations. So
the Prime Minister has made he plans to meet with Xi Jinping at the earliest opportunity, he said. Anita Anand is headed over to India and China and other places. So they are, that delicate balance you're talking about, they are trying their best, I think. Yeah.
So I think on critical minerals, for example, the United States is still overly reliant on China. And so I think that's a big piece where we can provide the supply chains, fund some projects, try to create more of that relationship there to allow the United States to get away from those sources of supply. So there are definitely aspects that we can bring to the fore on that front.
Okay, William Pellerin, thank you for coming in. Really appreciate your expertise today. I want to bring in the CBC's senior business correspondent, Peter Armstrong. We're told there might be a little delay for the Prime Minister, but that gives us a pause and a good moment to speak with Peter, who today was doing some reporting about how this is being felt in the United States. I had a home builders association on my show on Sunday, Peter, who was talking about lack of softwood to build homes, the price of homes going up by thousands of dollars, and really the squeeze on people trying to get into the real estate market now because of this. They are feeling it very directly. But you found plenty of examples of how this is playing out in the U.S.
Yeah, Rosie, I think squeeze is pretty much the perfect word for it because it being felt throughout the economy. It's not showing up in like GDP data, at least not yet, right? Like the GDP revised numbers came out for Q2, showed pretty good growth, 3.8%, I think it was. But when you look at and drill down on specific industries, right? Like farmers in the United States are getting clobbered, more to do with China than with Canada. But, they're looking at a bailout package for soybean farmers anywhere between $15 and $50 billion for American farmers. You hear from, the evolution of the message from the auto industry, I think, has been a really interesting one, that when those quarterly results came out that showed, the Fords of the world were looking at like a $2 billion tariff bill, they were pretty quiet about it and said, look, we're not going to pass on the costs, and they're very hedgy. The CEO of Ford, Jim Farley, came out last week and said, look, we're the most American automaker in the country, and we're getting clobbered by these tariffs. How are we expected to invest and build for American workers when we're facing this $2 billion headwind? And then there's a statement from Bernie Moreno, right, a Trump ally, who did an interview with Reuters, and the way it sort of came out a little jumbled, and boy, I wish somebody had asked him for clarification. But he did tell Reuters that automakers, specifically American automakers, should expect a significant, were his words, tariff relief, that companies that have final assembly in the U.S. would be rewarded, he said. The quote was for Ford, for Toyota, for Honda, for Tesla, for GM. Those are the top 5 domestic content vehicle producers. They'll be immune from tariffs, right? So you think about Ford, an F-150 is built in America, but it's using engines from Windsor. It's taking aluminum from Quebec. If they're immune from tariffs, then what are we like? Does that overlay with what is being talked about or will be talked about in the White House this morning? There's a ton of little bits of pressure that are just starting to build on this administration from American businesses, American industries, American workers that are suffering as a result of this trade war. And Rosie, I'll remind you, we had this conversation at the beginning of this, and we had it at the end of the last trade war in 2019, when it was that growing pressure from American companies that were saying, look, this is too hard for us to manage, that finally pushed Donald Trump into carving out a lot of those, specifically the steel and aluminum exemptions that we saw at the end of that first Trump presidency. And I started to see a lot of signs of that in hearing from industries, hearing from businesses, and then when I started compiling it into a piece, it did look like that same wave of pressure is just starting to build now.
The other industry that is not feeling the effects of this, though it was a funny part of your story, was the lobbying industry, which is booming as people are desperately banging on the door for subsidies and aid directly from the White House.
Right. I mean, the very swamp that Donald Trump said he was going to drain, $900 million in lobbying fees just this year alone. And that's sort of the frustration that you hear from industries. And we've been hearing it quietly since the trade war began. And that decision about, oh, boy, I don't want to pass on extra costs to my customers, my consumers, whatever that may be. Part of that was political. They didn't want to run against the ire of Donald Trump, but also they don't want to sort of really stick it to their customers at a time when they could ill afford to see prices rise. But as they're seeing money flow into sort of K Street lobbyists in Washington, that gets pretty frustrating to deal with. And that sense of frustration is what I think we're starting to see from, as I say, the Ford CEO and other sort of industry leaders in the United States that are getting sort of hit on this and feel they're not getting the kind of support from the administration that they might have otherwise expected.
Okay. Peter Armstrong, senior business reporter at CBC. Thank you for that. We'll come back to you. Appreciate you making some time for us. CBC Politics senior writer Aaron Wary is also joining us now in studio. I want to talk a little bit with both of you about the politics of this. The Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, we might even have a piece of this, wrote a letter yesterday to the Prime Minister demanding results. Andrew Scheer was in this studio saying the same with David last night. Here's a little bit of what Pierre Poilievre wrote. No more losing. It's time for you to deliver the promised wins. If you only return with excuses, broken promises, and photo ops, you will have failed our workers, our businesses, and our country. So those are the expectations of Pierre Poilievre firmly laid out there, though he also didn't put forward what his plan would be, but that's what he says the Prime Minister needs to do. And I would note that Andrew Scheer last night with David, made the good point that the Prime Minister set expectations for himself in many ways. And things are complicated, but I do wonder what happens if he comes out of the Oval Office today, doesn't take any questions, and we don't, at this stage, know whether he got anything.
I mean, I think we know what the Conservatives will say, obviously, given what they've already said. So I think we know what they'll say if they don't feel like something came out of this. I don't know that we know yet how Canadians are judging this and whether they have expectations that aren't being met at this point. I don't know that Canadians thought, Mark Carney's going to become Prime Minister and the tariffs are going to go away within 60 days. I don't know whether they thought we'll get to a peaceful resolution eventually. I don't know how Canadians are calibrating their expectations, especially because they know I think Canadians are at this point very familiar with Donald Trump. They're very familiar with how he operates, and I think they may have some sense of how difficult he is to deal with. And so I don't know that Canadians necessarily thought tariffs are going to go away as soon as Mark Carney becomes Prime Minister. That said, I think there are at some point expectations as it relates to what the trade-offs are. So maybe there are still trade-offs, but are we giving away too much? If we do get the tariffs off, did we give away too much? Is Mark Carney not being tough enough? Is he making too many concessions? I think those are the harder questions for Mark Carney that eventually have to be answered. I don't know at this point whether Canadians are looking at Mark Carney and saying we haven't gotten what we thought we were going to.
Okay, I want to go live to Premier Doug Ford, who is speaking at this hour, also with his expectations.
There has to be a point that if Prime Minister Carney can't get a deal, we have to start hitting back. We need to hit back hard. We can't continuously decline tariffs, and President Trump increases tariffs, no matter if it's 10% on our lumber industry, softwood lumber, or if it's 25% on furniture or cabinets. I visited a lot of furniture companies and cabinet manufacturers, and I know one thing: we buy a tremendous amount of furniture off the U.S. and as well as cabinets, but we also ship cabinets down to the U.S. But we can't just keep rolling over to President Trump. As he strengthens his case, we seem to be weakening our case by continuously pulling off tariffs. I'd take a different approach. Try to get a deal. If you can't, we got to hit him back hard and never stop hitting him back hard, because we can never take a back seat to anyone, especially President Trump. We have a great, great country, resilient country, a powerful economically, we're powerful. The U.S. exports more products to Canada than anywhere in the entire world. And it sounds great with the Americans until they start seeing inflation. We've seen inflation down in the U.S. I just came back from a meeting in Quebec with 2 governors. They're seeing inflation. We're seeing it in sectors. The auto sector, they're going to see an increase of over $107 billion. Other companies are seeing it. John Deere, they're laying over 280 people off because of tariffs. We're seeing it across every single sector. So it's time to sit down, let's get a deal, or let's start hitting back.
Premier, are you advocating the approach that Prime Minister Trudeau had more than the approach that Prime Minister Carney had? Trudeau, of course, imposed counter tariffs, and it didn't work. But you think we should go back to the Trudeau approach?
Well, I think we take an approach that let's get a deal. If the Americans want to see inflation stop, you make a deal with Canada. You want to see the economy grow, make a deal with Canada. That's what we need to do, because it will hurt both countries if we don't. But you sure don't sit back and get beat up by a bully every single day. It's like a kid going to the schoolyard and getting punched in the face every day. It's time to hit back if he can't get a deal. Maybe Prime Minister Carney knows something I don't know. And if that's the case, he should sit down with the premiers and explain that. That's what he needs to do.
Cut off the power back on the table.
And then
you pulled those off the table.
That's right.
Are you willing to do that? Is Ontario going to hit back?
Well, what we need to do is use that energy to be more competitive. If he wants to shut down every single industry, President Trump, we're going to need the energy. We're giving the U.S. energy at an extremely low cost. We're keeping 1.5 million lights on and businesses open in New York and Michigan and Minnesota, and I know other provinces are doing the same thing. Let's start giving it to our manufacturers. They work a night shift, off hours, off-peak hours. Maybe they want to shift some manufacturing and get their electricity at a much lower cost. I'd rather support our Ontario manufacturers than support our neighbors south of the border that are competing against us, and President Trump constantly attacking our economy, attacking our people.
Premier, on your letter to mayors today on speed cameras,
yes,
they were calling for the cameras to be tweaked so they only ticket those egregiously speeding, and for the cameras to only operate during school hours. What's so unreasonable about that?
What's unreasonable is a total cash grab, and we know speed cameras do not work. Simple as that. I have an idea that we're putting forward that we're going to put traffic calming infrastructure, and that will bring it down to zero. Folks, Toronto has one speed camera that produced over 70,000 tickets and millions of dollars of income. Now, wouldn't you think, rather than sit there and collect all the money, because it is a cash grab off the taxpayers, wouldn't you think someone would come up with common sense and say, okay, we're putting speed bumps on Parkside Drive, we're putting turnabouts. You just take a drive through Forest Hill, there's no speed cameras. I'll tell you a reason why. Every street you go down, no matter if it's a crosswalk, it's raised or speed bumps. So they don't have a problem with speeding. If you want to continue making it a cash grab and not looking at alternatives, we have an alternative to put infrastructure in. But folks, they don't want to do that. They want to continue to collect hundreds of millions of dollars and continue speeding. Let speeding happen. They aren't worried about the safety of people. If they were, they'd start installing infrastructure. Traffic calming infrastructure.
Cash grab to tweak the camera so they're catching someone going 20 or 30.
Richard, it's still a cash grab. So what you're saying,
Okay, there's Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, now talking about his mission to get rid of speed cameras in this province, which is important, but probably not, as David just joked with me, a topic in the Oval Office for the President and the Prime Minister, though you never know. Doug Ford there, sort of playing, I would argue, maybe a little bit of bad cop, saying that it is time for Canada. If we can't get a deal, that's the first goal, but if we can't, then Canada needs to hit back hard. And of course, we've seen Doug Ford certainly prepared to do that on his end and in his jurisdiction, a little different when you're the Prime Minister in terms of your approach. He also talked about new tariffs coming as of next week on October 14th, in fact, 1 week from today. The President's set to impose another 10% tariff on lumber and then a new 25% tariff on cabinets and furniture, which, as you heard the Premier of Ontario say, would hurt a lot of companies, manufacturing companies in Ontario, not to mention the softwood increase in the softwood tariff, which would do a lot of damage to many companies and industries in British Columbia. Okay, the Prime Minister's arrival, a little bit delayed. We are expecting him at any moment, where he will make his way there into the door and off to see the President in the Oval Office. He's accompanied by Melanie Joly, Anita Anand, Dominic LeBlanc, the Canada's ambassador to the United States, and maybe one other minister, so that he can have, a full conversation about things that might be problematic for the President. And David, what is, are there irritants that still exist there that might be a topic of conversation as Canada tries to find a way to maybe not hit back the way the Premier is suggesting, but to deal with some of those things that the President might be concerned with?
Yeah, look, I mean, the counter tariffs have gone. They've gone into compliance largely on not tariffing things that are CUSMA compliant. The digital services tax is gone. There is a disagreement in foreign policy issues, for example, on how to deal with Israel and the official recognition of the state of Palestine by Canada and other allies at the UN General Assembly. But, the Premier's point there that maybe Mark Carney knows something I don't know in terms of why he's not hitting back the way Doug Ford would like him to and sort of the way the Trudeau administration did in its final months. And if he does, he says the Prime Minister should sit down with the Premiers and tell them. It seems to me that you can't criticize U.S. tariffs as a tax on the American importer and the American consumer and talk about the damage it's going to do to the American economy and then hit back with counter tariffs without acknowledging you're doing the same thing to your economy.
Right.
And with the job loss numbers we have seen, the 80,000 jobs this year, with the GDP slowdown that we've seen and the cost to trade that we've seen, there is a circular firing squad nature to trade wars that involve tariffs and counter-tariffs. And they're kind of desperate to avoid, the exacerbation of the harm. You don't want to compound it. And it seems that the play is to allow the U.S. tariffs to ripple through the U.S. economy and to inflict that pain. Now, the challenge there is a lot of very smart U.S. business people did big stockpiling of imports in the run-up to the implementation of the tariff. So they built up their inventories without paying the tariff. And the analysis we've seen from Francis Donald and others is that those stockpiles will survive into 2026 and start to deteriorate in the first quarter. And that's where you're going to feel the pinch. That's where you're going to see the cost increases, and that's going to make things even worse. And that gets you closer to the midterm U.S. elections, which is also part of the strategy here. But you have container ships coming back from China and other places largely empty. And that is a canary in the coal mine for what's happening in the U.S. economy. So time, while the carnage is bad in Canada, especially if you're in those core sectors, the 85% of the goods still being covered by CUSMA. The Prime Minister is right when he says it's the best deal of any other country. The opposition is right when they say it is far worse than it was at the beginning of the year, and it's only gotten worse since the election with the doubling of tariffs in other places. So this seems to be the dynamic going into this, and it's that leader-to-leader relationship that is going to be critical for moving anything, it seems.
Yeah, and the Prime Minister has suggested at various points that he will take the time that is needed to get the deal that is needed. And I think that speaks to what you're talking about, and as Jean Charest reminded us earlier as well, the review of CUSMA has sort of started in each country before they all get together and have that review. So that is another factor in this, how Canada is approaching the review. I will just say that the flags have gotten higher. So I feel like that's a good sign for people arriving, yes.
Yeah, I would say, I think it's hard to see a world where Mark Carney and his government, certainly based on what Dominic Lebrun said at committee last week, signing on, like, sectoral tariff relief is different, but like on a broad-based trade deal, signing on anything with a baseline tariff on Canadian goods. I think they would be maybe more inclined to force the U.S. to impose that rather than agree to that in the CUSMA review or negotiate that at the bargaining table. Now, the sectoral stuff, the Section 232, which is what we're talking about with these tariffs, where Donald Trump uses the premise of national security to impose tariffs, that's a different negotiation than the broader thing. CUSMA is the real prize here, as important as those core sectors are, and that's the thing they're trying to preserve at all costs in the conversations with the White House.
Aaron?
Yeah, I think it's easy to understand the emotional appeal of hitting back with counter tariffs. I think the question is the strategic value of them. The only reason you would put counter tariffs in place is if you thought they could convince the other side to drop theirs. And if the Canadian side is looking at this and saying that's not going to happen, then it may not make sense to go forward with counter tariffs. The other issue that I think the federal government has been fairly open with is that, yes, Canada did move forward with retaliatory tariffs. It's just that it then looked around and didn't see anyone with it, except China. And so, I think Canada felt a little isolated on the idea of retaliation and had to make some decisions about whether it really wanted to be in that position. I do think, to David's analysis, to what our colleague Peter Armstrong was saying earlier, the best hope still remains that the American consumers and American businesses will feel the pain of American tariffs and force the American administration to make a change. We just haven't seen that yet. There is some evidence that, as David says, the costs that are being passed on to consumers aren't being felt yet. The American stock market is being propped up by, this rush to AI. So there are a bunch of reasons why it maybe hasn't come to hurt yet. Although if you look at Donald Trump's approval rating, it's 40% right now. But the best hope remains that it's domestic politics that will convince the American administration to change something. And that's where you start to look at the midterms next year. And maybe that's where things come to a head. But I think that, that's not a very satisfying argument to make to Canadians, right? To say to Canadians, look, we just have to wait for the American midterms, and that'll hopefully convince the Trump administration to move on.
Well, and when you look at the state of domestic politics in the United States right now, nothing is working as it kind of should, right? Like, the Republicans control the White House, the Senate, and the House, and there's a government shutdown because of their inability to sort of like pass, continuing resolutions and deal with finances. You have a president who is deploying the National Guard to cities governed by the opposing party to protect the federal agents he has unleashed to do deportation quotas in cities that he claims there is, again, a lawlessness and a crime situation. Congress has control of trade. Congress has control of tariffs. Congress has abdicated its constitutional authority to the president largely because the Republican Party has been captured by the MAGA movement. So I even wonder if the midterms will matter. You know what I mean? Because nothing, again, going back to my point a minute ago, conventional political and economic analysis does not hold because the basic institutions and division of powers, they aren't operating the way you would expect.
Okay, there's the president, and I imagine that means the Prime Minister is about to get out of the car here.
President Trump, sir, your message to Israel on the second anniversary of the Hamas attack.
Thank you very much. Will you talk about ending the trade war?
Okay, couple of questions yelled, but probably not the right moment to answer them. I would imagine once they're in the Oval Office. The president certainly will have some comments about the Middle East, given his 20-point peace plan that, we should point out, the Prime Minister has endorsed and said positive things to the president and others about. Those are the cabinet ministers, Ambassador Hillman, the clerk of the Privy Council, and others. They're entering with the Prime Minister. They will, some of them, a large number of them, will be in the Oval Office on that couch directly across from cabinet members from Donald Trump's cabinet as well. The president was asked a little bit about this in the Oval Office yesterday in terms of his expectations and what might happen in today's meeting. I'll play some of that tape to remind you of what he said.
Well, I guess he's going to ask about tariffs because a lot of companies from Canada are moving into the United States, you know. Everybody's moving back into the U.S., and he's probably going to be asking about tariffs. They're losing a lot of companies in Canada.
All right, so that is the president guessing that the Prime Minister might want to talk about tariffs. I would think that that's a pretty good guess. I would say we're talking a lot about getting the tariffs dropped and sort of the timing and the political leverage or factors that might be part of that. We should also say that the government is doing things right now in response to the tariffs, and that is outreach to European nations, different trading deals, trying, of course, to build up industry domestically. So that's the other piece that as Mark Carney says himself, we can control. And so he's taking those pieces and putting them into place. He was elected with the promise of doing those things as well, because if, as you're both saying, we don't know how this is going to unfold, the midterms may not even be a factor in what Donald Trump does. At least that is happening on one front. I just don't know if you don't get any positive results from the U.S. president, given the way Mark Carney campaigned, that you won't feel that politically.
Yeah, I mean, Aaron had the tremendous understatement where he said Canadians have some sense of how difficult Donald Trump is to deal with. I think they have a very good and clear sense after, 9 years, as a president and an ex-president, now a president again. Look, there's a couple of things at play here. There is the Donald Trump issue, right, which is really what it is. And does Trumpism survive Trump in the White House? Probably. This seems to be a feature of Republican politics now. You have to navigate that. That is your problem, even if it is not your fault as the Prime Minister. But your ability to control that is incredibly limited. The domestic economic reorientation, working with the premiers, the major projects, speeding things up, making it easier to do developments, and try to find internal ways to boost the GDP and jolt the job market. Those are things you do have more direct control on. And then there is a larger trade diversification thing, which you have to negotiate with Europe, you have to negotiate with Indonesia and other countries.
But those are longer term things, right?
Absolutely,
all of them.
absolutely. Yeah. But you can deal with that. And those may go faster, at least in terms of getting the deals. It takes a while for industry to take advantage of it. But to go back to what William Pellerin was saying earlier, the world is kind of realigning into economic blocks, right? Like there's the U.S. on one side and China on the other side as the main poles, but then people are trying to find alliances sort of independent of both of them because neither one is reliable. Neither one is trustworthy right now. And, the global order is kind of unraveling and fraying in real time, and you have to navigate all of that while also managing your domestic elected politics. So, yeah, there's pressure, to get something out of here today, but your ability to ensure that you get something out of this today, I mean, what if you go in there and Trump says, I don't want to talk about that today, I want to talk about the peace plan, or I want to talk about this, and I want to talk about a post-war Gaza. What do you do?
Yeah, and actually, we know that is often the case. That
he likes to pick the Prime Minister's brain on foreign policy, right?
And that when the last time he was there, they talked about Ukraine, they talked about the Middle East, they talked about things that were obviously not a priority for Canada. But you're not going to turn down an opportunity to get in his ear and to quote-unquote help him or help shape his thinking on an issue. And given that we are the second anniversary of the October 7th attacks, 2 years into that war, and there is a ceasefire being negotiated, being discussed, it's impossible that's not going to come up, and that the president won't have things to say to the prime minister about that too.
Yeah, look, effectively what we're saying is the prime minister is not in control of what happens today.
Of anything.
Absolutely not. No.
And that Canada is not necessarily in control of what happens today either. And I think that's a jarring thing to think about, but I think that is sort of the reality we're running up against. I think there is sort of, look, if in the short-term politics of this, looking ahead to the next election, looking backwards to the last election, one of Mark Carney's biggest advantages was the idea that he, more than Pierre Poilievre, was the right person to handle Trump, that's what Canadians who voted for the Liberals in the last election, that's one of the major things they had in mind. One thing that Conservatives can try to do in moments like this is try to neutralize that advantage.
Yeah.
They may not be able to completely, flip it, but if they can undermine the idea that Mark Carney can somehow handle this, that maybe helps them in the next election. The long-term issue is more, what do we do? What does Canada do if just these tariffs aren't going to go away tomorrow? And I think that is, looking ahead to the budget in the fall, looking ahead to some of the other policies the Liberals are pursuing, that's the bigger argument that they still have to tackle and really show that they have a command of. Because I think, one of Mark Carney's arguments during the campaign and coming out of the campaign is the relationship is over, we're in a new age.
Yep.
So what does that look like to actually deal with that? And are Canadians prepared for, disruption and, some amount of hardship and potentially, running sizable deficits to prop up industries that are hit by tariffs and make kind of big economic changes? I think that's the other piece of this. And I think, I think there's a lot of attention paid to whether, these tariffs are going to go away or not. I think, today is potentially going to be another reminder that there's just no going back to the pre-2016 world where, the prime minister goes down to the United States and says, hey, can we work out a deal? And they work out a deal, and then everything kind of carries on normal. That this is the sort of new normal, to use a cliche.
Well, and the language the prime minister himself uses around the rupture that has happened, in none of his dialogue and conversations about that does he talk about fixing the rupture. He talks about responding to and finding ways out of, but it is not as though the relationship is going to be repaired to the way it was. There is a broad understanding that that's not going to happen.
Well, look, America is fundamentally a different place in 2025, right? Like, I'm the oldest person at the table. My whole adult life, the U.S. has been the dominant world power. And things have been stable in the relationship largely because of a sense of restraint from, like, the modern day Rome and a sort of, it had a dedication to sort of the post-World War II order that it largely helped shape. And, it stabilized trade, it built security alliances, across the Atlantic Ocean. It led to, the World War II enemies becoming like big allies over time in Japan and Germany and Italy. But all of that is gone now, right? The devotion and dedication and commitment to an idea and a sense of shared values and history has been replaced by a very transactional focused sense of politics, that everything is a balance sheet and there's a zero-sum game approach to these things. And that is not necessarily something that will change. As you watch what is happening in the United States, and we get a lot of grief on my show, like, why are you always talking about what's happening down there? And I always say, look, when you live in the suburbs of Rome, you pay attention to the emperor, because the Democrats seem utterly unable to marshal and mount any kind of pushback against it. Going back to the example of the National Guard and different things that are happening there, this is happening with people cheering it on in other states. And it's not about the principle of whether the federal executive should act in such a way. It's about the red team versus the blue team, and sort of a deep tribalism has set in the politics there. We have to navigate that, and we have to deal with that, because we're collateral damage in those domestic internal agendas and forces that are at play. And there's a level of isolationism and America first, obviously, to use the president's phrase, that spills over the borders in profound and seismic ways. There are tariffs on everybody. There's trade disruption everywhere. You go back to the 1930s when the Smoot-Hawley tariffs were brought in. Different time, different world economic structure, but it dropped global trade by 2/3, right, and helped turn a recession into the Great Depression. And you have these same kind of disruptive impulses, if not on that scale, but of that flavor and of that nature. And you have to navigate it even though you have no control.
in spite of that exhaustive explanation, which based in history, I don't think that the official opposition cares about any of those things, right? Those realities. No. And I think that the politics are such that, to Aaron's point, they will try and neutralize this issue, but also try to damage the credibility that the Prime Minister ran on. Yeah. And if we end up in a recession and there's all sorts of other problems, then maybe his credibility is fine because he's the economist, but they need to take that away from him. And so if he can't get something out of this relationship, I think politically it becomes very challenging.
But on the other side of it,
I think they're heading into the Oval Office there. But keep talking.
But on the other side of it, Laura Stone made this point on the show last night, the Globe and Mail reporter, that you have to be careful not to be looking like you're cheering for failure.
That's right.
Because that's the way she described sort of the tone of the letter that Mr. Poilievre sent to the Prime Minister on Sunday and then released to the media. He does this every Sunday. He releases some sort of a missive to try to set the agenda, sort of setting expectations to this hopefully soon to be brighter view we have of the Oval Office.
Yeah, and I mean, that's what you do as a leader of the official opposition. You try and set the agenda. But there we are in the much golder and Oval Office than it was before. Very regal in appearance. That is done intentionally by the president. That's his flair. That's his style. And so you see the two leaders there chatting. We would expect them to say a few words, maybe take some questions. There are Canadian reporters in the room as well as American reporters.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. It's an honor to have the Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, who I have made very popular. He's an extremely popular Prime Minister, and I'm very honored to do it because I liked him. Right from the beginning, I've liked him, and we've had a good relationship. We have some natural conflict, but we'll probably work that out. But we've had a very strong relationship, and your hosting of the various countries that showed up, that was a beautiful job you did, and I appreciate it very much. We're going to be talking about trade. We're going to be talking about a lot of different things. We'll certainly be talking about Gaza. We're in very serious negotiations to, I guess you could say, depending on the way you count, 3,000 years. You could say 500 years. You could say, but it's been raging for a long time. And I think there's a possibility that we could have peace in the Middle East. It's something even beyond the Gaza situation. We want a release of the hostages immediately, etc. And so our team is over there now. Another team just left, and other countries, literally every country in the world has supported the plan.
Yep.
I don't think there's anybody that hasn't, actually, not that I've seen. But there's a real chance that we could do something, so you may have some questions on that later. But in the meantime, we'll spend some time and we'll make some deals and we'll do some things that are good for both of our countries. And Mark, it's an honor to have you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. If I may, you kindly hosted me and some of my colleagues a few months ago, and I said at the time, you are a transformative president. And since then, the transformation in the economy, unprecedented commitments of NATO partners to defense spending, peace from India, Pakistan through to Azerbaijan, Armenia, disabling Iran as a force of terror, and now, and I'm running out of time, but this is in many respects the most important.
The merger of Canada and the United States.
That wasn't where I was going. On this solemn day of commemoration of the horrific attacks of October 7th, for the first time in decades, hundreds of years, thousands of years, this prospect of peace that you've made possible. Canada stands foursquare behind those efforts, and we'll do whatever we can to support
Very
that.
nice.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mark, very much. Any questions?
What would it take for you to drop or lower your tariffs on Canadian sectors, including aluminum and steel?
Well, we're going to be talking about that with the Prime Minister. We'll be talking about tariffs. We'll be talking about a lot of that, but that's for a little bit later on. I want to just acknowledge our great ambassador. Is he doing a good job?
He's doing a good job.
Otherwise, I'll get him out of there so fast. No, you have a
Is it the White House's position that furloughed workers should be paid for their back pay?
I would say it depends on who we're talking about. I can tell you this, the Democrats have put a lot of people in great risk and jeopardy, but it really depends on who you're talking about. But for the most part, we're going to take care of our people. There are some people that really don't deserve to be taken care of, and we'll take care of them in a different way. Okay? Thank you.
Mr. President, in your opinion, why has Canada and the United States failed to reach an agreement up until now?
Well, it's a complicated agreement, more complicated maybe than any other agreement we have on trade, because, you know, we have natural conflict. We also have mutual love. You know, we have great love for each other. I love this. I love Canada and the people of Canada, and Mark feels the same way about here. The problem we have is that they want a car company and I want a car company, meaning the U.S. wants a car company, and they want steel and we want steel. And, you know, so in other countries, they're very far away, and there's no problem. You can compete and you can do. We don't like to compete because we sort of hurt each other when we compete, and so we have a natural conflict. It's a natural business conflict. Nothing wrong with it, and I think we've come a long way over the last few months, actually, in terms of that relationship. So when it comes to trade, the United States was always giving everything. They gave everything to Canada. They would, you know, let car companies leave here and go to Canada. But that hurts the United States. And, you know, other presidents didn't see that. They weren't business-oriented. They might have been good politicians in some cases, not in all cases. They were bad at both. But it's a very natural conflict, and it's something that we're working on.
Canada has offered a lot of compromise this summer. Are you willing today to offer some compromise to Canada, maybe on steel, on anything else?
Well, we've made compromise, and we've made some compromise even on steel. But, you know, we have the same basic authority and the same basic, this could be also a little bit of a conflict with other countries all over the world on steel, because we want to make our own steel. We don't want to bring steel in for the most part, but we will bring it in, and we do bring it in. We continue to bring it in from Canada, but there is a tariff to pay. And I think that would be a normal thing to say, but we've come a long way. I think, Howard, we can truly say. Do you want to make a comment on that?
Well, I think the opportunity to work together, but as you said, there's conflict. You know, why do we make cars in Canada? You've called that out, and you've addressed that. So there are places we should work together, and there are places that we have natural conflict.
It's a tough situation because we want to make our cars here. At the same time, we want Canada to do well making cars. So we're working on formulas, and I think we'll get there.
Canadians are refusing to go to the U.S. The numbers are down like 23% in the first 7 months of the year. What do you say to Canadians that don't want to go to the U.S. now because of your 51st state talk, because of the trade war, the tariffs?
Yeah.
And
Well,
fear
I understand it. Look, I
that
understand that, and Americans don't want to buy cars that are made in Canada, you know. I mean, we have the same conflict. So there isn't, it's something that will get worked out. There's still great love between the two countries, but, you know, American people want product here. They want to make it here. Detroit was emptied out and moved to Canada, moved to Mexico, moved to other places, not just Canada. And now they're all moving back, you know, they're moving back. We have, right now, I was just telling Mark, we have 17 trillion, but it's really much higher. That was as of a couple of months ago. Yeah. We have over $17 trillion being invested now in the United States. As an example, Biden, he was the worst president we've ever had, but they had less than $1 trillion in 4 years. We have more than 17 trillion in 8 months. 8 months. And I think that number is going to be $21, $22 trillion. There's never been anything like that in the history of the world for any country, not even close. You know, if you did 1 trillion in a year, that's pretty good. We're going to do over 20. And it's coming in with AI. It's coming in with auto plants. You know, we're building auto plants, a lot of auto plants in the U.S. It's coming in for a lot of reasons. It's coming in because of the fact, I think the November 5th election was a big factor, and I think the tariffs are a big factor. And again, we want Canada to do great, but you know, there's a point at which we also want the same business. We're competing for the same business. That's the problem. That's why I keep mentioning one way to solve that problem is a very easy way. but we're competing for the same business. He wants to make cars, we want to make cars, and we're in competition. And the advantage we have is we have this massive market. So it's a, you know, it's quite an advantage.
Mr. President, can we talk about Portland for a second? Are you planning to invoke the Insurrection Act? That would be, a very long-standing law that's been on the books.
Yeah, well, it's been invoked before, as you know. If you look at Chicago, Chicago's a great city where there's a lot of crime. And if the governor can't do the job, we'll do the job. It's all very simple. They probably had 50 murders in Chicago over the last 5, 6, 7 months. Many people were shot. And then the governor gets up and he says, well, we can handle it. They can't handle it. They don't know what they're doing. The mayor is grossly incompetent. He's at a 4% approval rating in Chicago. He's at a 4%, lowest approval rating, lower than even de Blasio had, which is hard to believe in New York. I thought de Blasio would always maintain that record, but the Chicago guy is even lower. So I think that we want safe cities. If you look at D.C., you would right now, Mark, you could go out, take your family out to dinner, you could walk right down the middle of the street. There is no crime in D.C. When I got here, this place was a raging hellhole where people would come from Canada, people would come from other places and end up getting shot. Nobody's being shot. The National Guard's been unbelievable. I mean, they are strong, tough guys. You know, we won something at the Supreme Court, which is a big deal, merit. Everything now in this country is merit-based. I didn't think I'd ever see it again. And we have our soldiers are merit-based, too. And they're central casting. And they walk through that town, and I'll tell you what, this place is safe. It's beautiful. Now we're in Memphis, and the same thing's happening. You're getting the reports. The bad guys are saying, we don't want anything to do with this. And we're removing many people. In D.C., we took out 1,700 career criminals and sent them back to the countries from which they came, mostly led out by Biden and his people that had an open border policy. And, you know, Canada, you suffered because of that, too, because they'd come here and they'd go into Canada also. So we're like a buffer for that in terms of Canada suffered greatly by Biden and the open border, the policy of open border, totally unchecked, totally unvetted. And these people were, you know, if you got 5%, 2%, now you were getting a lot of bad people. And we now have a closed border. You've done well. Yep. We have a closed border, and it's a really closed border. In fact, for 4 months, I don't even know if this is possible, but the figures were released. 0 people were able to come into the United States from the southern border. 0. And as you know, we've taken a very hard stand on drugs. This is also benefiting you. A lot of we call them the water drugs, the drugs that come in through water. They're not coming. There are no boats anymore. Frankly, there are no fishing boats. There's no boats out there, period. If you want to know the truth, we're saying, does anybody go fishing anymore? The fact is we knocked out, probably saved at least 100,000 lives, American lives, Canadian lives, by taking out all those boats coming in. So it's, and now they don't come in that way anymore. Now they'll come in other ways, and we're not going to allow that either. So we've done a great job on that. But on crime, Chicago's a great city, but you can't be a great city if you have murders and if you have a lot of problems, and they do. And they have an incompetent policy, just like they had open border policy, anybody could come in. They came in from prisons, they came in from mental institutions, drug dealers, they came in from all over the place, and we don't have that anymore. This country is becoming we're a very strong country. Look, financially speaking, I would say that because of the tariffs, because of the election, because of the policy, because of the great big beautiful deal, it's what I added the word great because it really is. It's the biggest bill ever passed in the history of our country. We don't need another bill. It's the biggest tax cuts, I mean, when you think no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, no tax on overtime for the people. But far beyond that, what it does is incentivizes auto plants and AI and all of the things that Nobody's ever passed a bill like it. We don't need another bill. We don't need any more bills. I said, let's get it all at once. I was greatly helped by our Speaker, Mike Johnson, and by the Senate. I'll tell you what, John Thune's been, both of those guys have been incredible. And we got a bill passed that we really, I said, let's see if we can get it all done, because these Democrats are like insurrectionists, okay? They're so bad for our country. So their policy is so bad for our country. I said, let's see if we can get it all done in the big, and everybody said it's not doable, because it's the biggest bill ever passed in the history of our country. And we got it all done. We don't need anything else. We got everything we want. And now, because of that, that's a big reason why the companies are coming in. You know, 1 year depreciation, 1 year write-off, 1 year expensing. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. So they're coming in from all over the world. But to have a great country, you can't have crime. And we don't have crime, but we have cities where there's tremendous crime. And Chicago's one of them. And if the governor can't straighten it out, we'll straighten it out. Thank you. A question for the President.
Do you remain committed to,
Mr. Prime Minister, I'd like to know how come the UK and the European Union have succeeded to sign deals and bring the tariffs down, and Canada still hasn't been able to do the same?
Yeah, because they're not located right next to each other. It makes it, in many cases, it's much better and easier. But
yeah, and if I may, let's be clear about the relationship as it stands right now. We are the second largest trading partner of the United States. We do a lot of trade going across the border where we're cooperating, first thing. Secondly, we are the largest foreign investor in the United States. $500 billion in the last 5 years alone, probably $8 trillion in the next 5 years if we get the agreement that we expect to get. Thirdly, there are areas, as the President just said, where conflict, maybe not so much conflict, we compete. There are areas where we compete, and it's in those areas where we have to come to an agreement that works. But there are more areas where we are stronger together, and that's what we're focused on. And we're going to get the right deal. Right deal for America, right deal, obviously, from my perspective, for Canada.
Including one thing that, wait a minute, easy, wait. So one thing where we are working very closely is the Golden Dome. That's the protective mechanism, and you see how that works. It's unbelievable. Ronald Reagan wanted to have it, and at that time they didn't have the technology, even close to the technology, but he was advanced, and we'll be working together on a Golden Dome for the two countries, and it's something that I think is going to be very important, especially when you look at the world, you look at what's happening. We want to have that protection. It's really amazing. The technology is unbelievable.
Why do you say some federal workers should not get their back pay? Why do you say some?
Well, you're going to have to figure that out, okay? Ask the Democrats that question. Go ahead.
Mr. President, just to follow up there, I mean, the law says that when the government is reopened, that workers will receive their back pay. So are you going to define the law there, or what do you?
I follow the law, and what the law says is correct, and I follow the law.
Mr. President, will Canada be leaving empty-handed, or will will Mr. Carney be leaving Washington with a deal on tariffs?
I think they're going to be very happy. We have a lot of things that we're working on that people don't talk about. They talk about, competitiveness. She's a very competitive person. And they talk about things that we don't necessarily agree on. But I think they're going to walk away very happy. I think so.
There's been a minimum tariff that countries have got. When USMCA gets renegotiated, do you want a minimum tariff on goods between Canada and the U.S.?
Well, we're going to have tariffs between Canada, and, they have them with us. I will say with our farmers, as you know, they went up to as much as 400%, 250, 300, and even one at 401. We found one having to do with a very small product, but it was high. So we've always had tariffs between the two of us, and actually Canada was charging us very high tariffs on our agricultural things, a lot of our agricultural product, and that's one of the things that we talk about for bringing that down. So this is a mutual thing, but We've been charged tariffs. Look, we're the king of being screwed by tariffs, just so you understand. And I'm not talking about with Canada. I'm talking about with countries all over the world. When you look at Europe, when you look at China, when you look at all of the, almost every country charged the U.S., we didn't charge them. Because we were led by stupid people in many cases. Stupid people. They took advantage of our country. They're not taking advantage of us anymore. You know, if you looked at European Union, they're all my friends. I don't blame them. I blame our presidents. I blame our past presidents and, you know, business leaders. But we are the king of countries that have been taken advantage of for many, many years. We've been paying trillions and trillions of dollars and receiving nothing at all. As an example, prior to the deal with Europe, where they pay a lot of money, but they're happy and I'm happy. The deal was good. It's a fair deal, but it wasn't fair. You couldn't put a car into Europe. You couldn't sell your agriculture into Europe. You couldn't do anything. And now we have it so that it's open. We charge them tariffs. We didn't charge them tariffs a car. They charge us tremendous. I said to Angela Merkel once, I said, how many cars have gone to Germany from the United States? And she said, well, I don't believe any. And I said, you're right. You're right. Well, that doesn't happen anymore. And they're paying a fair amount. It's just a fair amount. It's not, I could ask for much more. It's a fair amount. But the United States now is using the same thing that they've used on us. And I just can't believe it's taken presidents so long to do this. And again, we're going to treat people fairly. We're going to especially treat Canada fairly. But I can't believe it's taken so long where we get charged and don't charge them. Japan was a good example. We made a deal with Japan. You saw that, Mark? A deal with Japan. It's a much different deal than we've had in the past. But they would send us millions of cars, no charge. We weren't allowed to send them cars. We sent them no cars. I doubt you had one car go into Japan because we were restricted. They didn't want our cars. Same thing with Europe, same thing with other places. So now all we do now is fairness. But fairness leads us to the most successful country there's ever been. You know, we have some advantages over other countries, and we do have a great market. We have an amazing market. But you know what? If I let this go, if we didn't win this election, if we had these people that were running, that were ruining our country, destroying our country with their open borders and men playing in women's sports and transgender from everybody and windmills all over the place, if we allowed that to go on for another couple of years, we would be, I'm not sure that we'd even have a country. Yeah, Brian. And by the way, I'm not sure we would have even had a country. And now we have the most successful country in the world. Brian?
Yes, sir. What is your message to Democrats ahead of a next vote to open up the government? The American people are saying, open the damn government. What's your message to them right now?
Well, they're the ones that started it. They're the ones that have it. And it's almost like a kamikaze attack by them. You want to know the truth? This is like a kamikaze attack. They almost, you know, they have nothing to lose. They've lost the elections. They've lost the presidential election in a landslide. I saw the other day where Kamala said this was a very close election. This was one of the biggest sweeps that anybody's ever had. Won the popular vote by millions, won the Electoral College by a massive amount. They said, if I got 270, that would be great. But I got, I think, 312 or 315, and they got 220. So, you know, we won that. But we won counties. The big thing is counties. So out of all of the counties, thousands and thousands, we got 2,500. They got 525. It was a landslide. And we listened, oh, yes, it was close. It was one of the greatest victories ever. And it was a mandate to do what we're doing. And I hope, and Mark wants this as much as I do, we are very close to making a deal on the Middle East that will bring peace to the Middle East. After all of these years of millions and millions, tens of millions of people being killed, there's a chance to bring peace to the Middle East. In addition to that, I made 7 other deals, and they're, you know, great. And we're, you know, things are happening with respect to Russia, Ukraine. That's one that last week, Mark, 7,812 people were killed. Soldiers, mostly soldiers. But 7,000, more than 7,000, almost 8,000 soldiers were killed. It's a crazy thing. I thought that would have been one of the easy ones. I get along very well with Putin, and I thought that would have been, I'm very disappointed in him because I thought this would have been an easy one to settle, but it's turned out to be maybe tougher than the Middle East. We'll see what happens with the Middle East. Go ahead, behind, yes.
Is the fentanyl crisis over with Canada, with the Canadian border?
Is what?
The fentanyl crisis.
No, it's not over. It's never, I think it's never going to be over, frankly. But they've done, Canada's worked hard, and they've done a much better job than in the past. We have very few people coming in through our southern border, too. We've worked with Canada, and we've worked with Mexico, so we've made it a lot better.
Look, 80 is too much. 80 is too much.
Wait.
On fentanyl, any amount is too much. So we've gotten it down. It's down substantially. It's less than 1%, but it's still too much. It's too much at home in Canada.
A lot of people.
Yeah, we got to stamp it out.
On USMCA, are the two of you both committed to seeing it through in the renegotiation of that deal that you made?
Well, we can renegotiate it, and that would be good, or we can just do different deals. We're allowed to do different deals if we want. We might make deals that are better for the individual
What's your preference?
countries. I don't care. I want to make whatever the best deal is for this country, and also very much with Canada in mind. Yeah, go ahead, please. Go ahead, sir.
Sir, on China, what more can the United States and Canada do together to counter China?
Well, you have to be able to compete. They're a great competitor, and Mark and I both know that, and you have to be able to compete. We have big advantages over China for lots of different reasons, and I think we're doing very well with China. I get along very well with President Xi. I'm going to be meeting him in a few weeks, as you know. I'll be meeting him in South Korea. But we've had a very good relationship for a long time. But you have to be able to compete. To do well with China, if you can't compete, you're not going to do well with China. And Canada is very competitive. I can tell you that. Canada is a very competitive country. And I think Canada's done very well over the years with China.
Yeah, we have. But we'll do better together on that.
Mr. President, on the Middle East, what guarantees are you giving your Arab partners that Israel will not resume its offensive after the hostages are released?
Well, the primary guarantee is once this deal happens, if it does happen, look, they're in negotiations right now, we are going to do everything possible. We have a lot of power, and we're going to do everything possible to make sure everybody adheres to the deal. Okay?
Are you concerned about the delays at airports, and how do you see the shutdown moving?
Oh, sure. I mean, it's they're all Democrat delays. There are delays at the airport. That's standard. And again, this is something that every day we put forth a bill. It's just a continuation. It's a very simple thing to sign and very simple to do. And I really think that these are people that I think they have nothing to lose. They have a party that's out of control. They have no leader. Nobody knows who the leader is. I look at people with very low IQs like Crockett, this woman Crockett. I never met her, but she's a low IQ individual. I look at AOC talking about how if they want to negotiate, they can come to my office. She's not in that position to do that. And who the hell is she to say that? And then I watch Nancy Pelosi not knowing what to do. I watch their leadership. Look, Schumer is petrified of primary because he's not going to win probably against anybody in a primary. You know, Schumer did the right thing, but he handled it badly originally a year ago. He did probably the right thing, but he handled it badly. I think Schumer's incapable of making a deal. They are a mess. They're a party that has no leadership. They have, and they have no policy. You know, I think we have great leadership, but we also have great policy. We have strong borders. We have no men and women's sports. I mean, basic things. We're not going to take your child away and change the sex of your child. We're not going to do things like that. What they're doing to the country is so incredible. And they got away with it with all their woke crap, and now it's stopped. And we have a country that's based on common sense and strength. and intelligence. I mean, we have the United States of America, and I say it all the time. Other leaders have told me this. Mark hasn't yet, but I think he would. A year ago, we were a dead country, and now we are the hottest country anywhere in the world. Maybe Canada. I'll give Canada, but because I do like Canada. But you know, we're the hottest country in the world right now. There's never been a country that has the kind of money coming into it. There's never been anything like this. There has never been a country that if you take $1 trillion, that would be unbelievable. We're going to have over $20 trillion invested in this country. There's never been anything like what you're seeing, and it's based on good policy and common sense and leadership. Yeah.
Mr. President, what is Canada giving you in return? If you say Mr. Carney is going to be leaving Washington happy, what's Canada giving you in return?
Well, you'll find out, but I think the people of Canada, they will love us again. Most of them still do. If you say only 25%, I assume a lot of them, I think they love us. And you know what? I'm not the biggest hockey fan, but I like it a lot. And I watched some of the greatest hockey games I've ever. How good were those games, right?
Yeah, very good. We're coming down for the World Series, Mr. President.
Oh, good.
Canadians.
By the way, your team is looking pretty good.
President, will you sign a trade deal with Canada that doesn't include supply managed goods like dairy, for example? If the federal government.
Well, a deal would include dairy. I mean, it's going to include everything. We'll do a comprehensive.
Have you identified programs to eliminate under this shutdown?
Oh, sure.
Which ones?
We have a lot. I'm not going to tell you, but we'll be announcing it pretty soon. But we have a lot of things that we're going to eliminate and permanently eliminate. You know, one of the things that we have is some advantage, you could say. But because of the shutdown, which I think they made a big mistake, we're able to take out billions and billions of dollars of waste, fraud, and abuse. And they've handed it, you know, on a silver platter. And you know Russell Vogt, he's a serious person, very serious person, and he's sitting there and he's getting ready to cut things. And this is something that was handed to us by, I assume, Schumer. I just don't know if Schumer has any power anymore. I look at your leadership, I don't know who to speak to. I'll tell you what, I'm getting calls from Democrats wanting to meet. I never even heard their names before, and they're claiming to be leader. The Democrats have no leader. They remind me of Somalia, okay? You know? And I met the president of Somalia. I told him about the problem he's got. I said, you have somebody from Somalia who's telling us how to run our country. She's from Somalia. He said, would you like to take her back? He said, no, I don't want her. Okay, you know who I'm talking about? Say it again.
How many permanent jobs are you talking about to be eliminated?
Well, I can tell you, I'll be able to tell you that in 4 or 5 days if this keeps going on. If this keeps going on, it'll be substantial. And a lot of those jobs will never come back. But you're going to have a lot closer to a balanced budget, actually.
Is there anything the Prime Minister has done that's making it more difficult to reach a deal?
Say it?
Is there anything the Prime Minister has done that's making it more difficult or easier to reach a deal?
No, I think he's a great Prime Minister. I mean, he could represent me anytime. I will tell you, I'm not saying that because he's here. No, he is a very strong, very good leader. He's a nice man, but he can be nasty. He can be very nasty, maybe as nasty as anybody.
How?
I think Canada, let me put it this way, I can tell you this because I deal with lots of leaders all over the world. He is a world-class leader. He's a man that knows what he wants, and I'm not surprised to see that he won the election and won it substantially, and I would think he's more popular now. He's a good man. He does a great job, and he's a tough negotiator.
So then what's holding things up? If he's a great man and you want to do a deal with Canada, why aren't you?
Because I want to be a great man, too. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. That could have been good.
I think you got that one.
That could have been good. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, just over 30 minutes of a meeting in the Oval Office where there was a lot that came out, as is often the case with the President of the United States, ending on a very light note with many compliments by the President to the Prime Minister, saying that he's very strong, he's a world-class leader, he's a, quote, tough negotiator. He's a nice man, but he can be very nasty too, said the President, although it sounded more like praise than an insult. And he was asked then by a Canadian reporter, if that's the case, why can't you get a deal? And the President said, well, I want to be a great man too. But there were lots of hints throughout that impromptu press conference or planned press conference, given it's in the Oval Office, suggesting that something could be going to happen between Canada and the U.S. The President saying, I think they're going to walk away very happy. You'll find out that we will get there, was another way that the President put it, although didn't allude to anything in particular. Gave lots of signs there that could be framed as positive, I think, as was the whole interaction, frankly, between the President and the Prime Minister. David?
Look, the dynamic between the two leaders, very friendly, like it has been when we've seen them together. That room seemed less tense than when I was there in May. You could cut it with a knife, but it was also the first Oval Office visit, and the Zelensky visit was very much on people's minds. Praise there for Prime Minister Carney, signaling something could be done there today. But again, there is always this element of menace to what the President says, like, they want a car company, I want a car company. They want to make steel, I want to make steel. We're competing. And made it very clear. He called in Howard Lutnick, who, just reinforced what the President said, that, they're working on a formula, was what was said, about cars and steel and these things. And the President driving home the fact that the advantage they have is the giant market. Like, essentially just laying it out there. We have the biggest market. We're the dominant economic player. We're kind of tired with the way things are going. We want these things that you have, and they're going to use the weight and force of U.S. economic power to get those things. So while he does seem to be quite affectionate of the Prime Minister, because imagine how bad things would be if he was not, he says, I think they're going to walk away happy. Well, we'll see. Is that, him projecting that maybe he's happy with where things are from the U.S. perspective, and thinking because he's happy, everyone is happy. Because there was a lot of things there. We are the king of being screwed by tariffs. This victim mindset that exists in the Trump administration was still there. So look, it looked positive. It looked friendly. Mark Carney barely spoke in the 32 minutes of monologue for the most part. I think it was about 90 seconds maybe total of Prime Minister Carney in that. But rather smartly, I think, Rosie, he didn't litigate on things. Like when the President talked about how we allow car companies to go to the U.S. I mean, this was by design. It was built on both sides of the border, going back to the Auto Pact 60 years ago. He didn't litigate that point because what's the upside? On fentanyl, he interjected to say, we've got the amounts way down, but any amount is too much. So, Canada's done a good job. Canada's not your problem, but we hear you, Mr. President. This is a problem we do need to work on. So there was this blend of flattery, giving him credit for India, Pakistan, Azerbaijan, the Middle East, all of these things, and talking about him being a transformative president, which is the perfect word, actually, to describe Donald Trump. So nothing in public, avoiding that sort of cathartic impulse to maybe respond and do something there, but strategically will get you nowhere. And so we need to see now if the kind words of the President, because he didn't call Mark Carney a low IQ guy or any of those things, whether that translates into something material and meaningful by the end of the day. Because he was very nice to him in May, and then by the end of the month, steel and aluminum tariffs went up to 50%, right? So things have gone in the wrong direction, even if the rhetoric is good. Nice words in a pool spray, as we call those events, that does nothing for steel workers, auto workers, softwood lumber workers, and people who make cabinets and trucks.
I did think, though, the way he was characterizing the relationship was slightly different, talking about natural conflict and mutual love. These are the President's words, saying we have natural business conflict. And in fact, when he was asked why Canada can't get a deal and other countries would, it was the Prime Minister that was asked that question, but the President interjected and said, it's because we're not located right next to each other, and that creates other challenges, which is true. But there were some things there that the president said, put aside the suggestions that there are things that will make Canada happy. There were some things there that would be very concerning. We're going to talk to Flavio Volpe in a minute, but the idea that having an integrated auto sector doesn't seem to be something the president is interested in.
Yeah, look, I mean, if you're looking for good news, I guess it's the idea that we're going to come away with something to feel good about. I believe the president's comment was that Canadians will love the United States again. We'll see
what that means, yeah.
We'll see what that looks like. But there is still that undercurrent of, David mentioned the auto pact. I don't think the auto pact's been mentioned so many times in the last 6 months than it has in the previous 60 years. We have an integrated auto sector, and the president seems to not think that's a great thing, or seems to not see a natural advantage in that. He talks about competing for car companies. He talks about, not wanting to buy cars made in Canada. Those are pretty big issues and pretty big differences. And I think it just hits the point again that this is not the pre-2016 world. This is not, we spent decades integrating our economies, and this president doesn't necessarily see the advantage in that or what's in it for him. And also, there were hints, I think, of concern about supply management. Talking about tariffs on farmers. Those are issues that presumably are going to come up when the renegotiation starts of the North American Free Trade Agreement. So, yes, maybe, we'll hear from the governments later today that there's some kind of relief on steel and aluminum or steel or something. Maybe it will count as a win. But I don't think it changes the underlying facts of the situation, which is that this is a different president and a different United States.
Well, he even said he might renegotiate CUSMA. He might not. He said, I'll do other deals too if needed. I want to get Katie in there.
Well, just quickly, if you listen to the way the president describes trade and relationships with countries, he divides them into competitors, customers, and suppliers, never partners.
Yeah.
And the Canadian and U.S. economy is relied on partnership, and that's very much the challenge we have right now.
Okay, Katie Simpson's outside the White House. She was listening in as well there, Katie. I don't know whether you have any better sense there at what we might hear about later, because certainly the president dropped lots of hints, but he wouldn't get into any details. But he seems to think Canada will leave this meeting happy, or happier maybe, because this is all a game of incremental movements.
Raging incrementalism, Rosie. That's the name of the game when it comes to trade and Canada-U.S. relations at this time. Here's the thing. I think what we saw in there sort of speaks to what we have been reporting since Monday morning, that there was some cautious optimism, some expectation that there could be something for Canada here. And Donald Trump is playing along and hinting that, that could be the case. What our sources had told us, the expectation heading into this meeting, into the working meeting that'll be taking place right now inside the Oval Office, I think they're going to have a working lunch as well, is hopefully we're going to learn a little bit more about what is being finalized in there, because again, until Donald Trump signs off on it, it's not happening. All the cabinet secretaries and staff members can say whatever they like. Everything comes down to Donald Trump and Donald Trump alone. Something that was interesting in there is that, sort of the body language of the leaders as they're sitting there, Donald Trump sort of tapping Mark Carney on the leg as they're making jokes, and sort of like having that really comfortable, seemingly comfortable relationship. But it's one thing, again, I believe David made this point, it's one thing when the leaders look like they're at ease. It's a completely other thing whether they're actually going to see some relief or some ease when it comes to those tariffs. Mark Carney also, when you're inside the room, I'm not sure if the cameras were on him at the time, when Donald Trump was saying some of the more outrageous things related to domestic politics in the United States, Mark Carney would raise an eyebrow and sort of like, it was funny to see the, I don't know if it's a lack of poker face, but during some of his answers, Carney was winking toward the reporters, not at any specific reporters, but sort of in the room as Donald Trump was saying some of the things. And I know that got picked up on social media real hard last time. But those are the kinds of things in the room. You see the body language of the Canadians, everyone sort of sitting forward, looking very interested, standing there, or those who are standing behind the couch, really unsure what to expect, because you don't know what version of Donald Trump you're going to get. Today, we saw the president seemingly in good spirits, joking around with Prime Minister Carney. But again, You know, if jokes don't lead to relief, what does it do?
I agree. We'll see whether or not that nice relationship, which is important, it is 100% important. If you don't have it, you're not going to get anywhere, but we'll see whether or not it actually gets results. Thank you for that, Katie, at the White House. And yes, this Prime Minister doesn't have a great poker face and does like to wink. So those are two things that Katie noticed and are true. So sometimes raised an eyebrow at some of the things that the president said, but certainly didn't say much himself inside the Oval Office. Flavio Volpe is the president of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association, and he joins us now. Thanks for waiting around there, Flavio. Couple things that I heard that maybe would have got you a little bit concerned, but give me your overall impression of what you heard there.
Well, I thought the body language between the two leaders was important. I know that you and David were just talking about it there. Look, a lot of this comes down to relationships with Donald Trump. He spoke differently about Canada. You know, you talked a little bit about, or David talked a little bit about, we never talk about countries as partners. But he did appear to be maybe subconsciously elevating the status of Canada as a competitor. He said the U.S. is a great nation, maybe the greatest nation. And then he turned to the Prime Minister and said, well, you know, maybe I don't want to speak for Canada here. You guys are pretty good too. Talked about Canada being a competitor and competitive with China. I think that's important. But, you know, he again, has got to focus on Canadian cars, which, you know, for the record, are American cars made in Canada with American parts and American raw materials, and Japanese cars. It's an incredible fixation. It's one of the strengths of the U.S. economy. And him and Howard Lutnick both spoke to the fact that, you know, they see it differently than the facts.
Yeah. I mean, the president at one point said, and this is not a new thing either, he said, why do we even make cars in Canada? When you hear those things that don't seem to be changing in terms of his evaluation of the auto industry, I mean, that can't be very reassuring that tariffs on the auto industry will ever be lifted.
Well, it's he does take a style to take an extreme position and then work his way backwards. So, you know, what's important always is the paperwork. It's not reassuring, of course it isn't, but it's also one of the reasons why we're all pushing to try to get the auto industry to orient its products to Canadian buyers more than it does. You know, we sell 85% of the cars we make to Americans because that's what was economically expedient. Well, if we're not in that world anymore, maybe the companies need to build where they sell a little bit more. And, you know, we're working with this government on programs to retool in that direction. Nothing replaces access to the U.S. market. And I'm hoping that the conversation inside the room is a little bit different. He's good at playing poker. He likes to, he likes to fake out his competitors, and maybe that's what he's doing here.
What do you, are you hearing anything about what he might be alluding to there in terms of making Canada happy, or we will get there, or something we'll hear more about today? Are you hearing anything about what that might be?
Well, we know that a lot of American commercial interests are asking for relief on steel tariffs and aluminum tariffs. Some of those are auto companies. For example, Ford Motor Company needs their engine plant in Windsor and the smelters in Quebec. And so there might be a framework here that gives us a window into what can we expect to possibly come through before the USMCA review, but I think it's a window into their posture on the USMCA.
Yeah, well, I'll end on that because the president also said, yeah, we might review that, renegotiate it. We might come up with some kind of other deal. Anything there that was concerning to you that might mean that the deal itself is not really the direction that the president wants to go in, that he wants something different?
No, I think that's a similar language that we normally hear. And I did hear him say nice things about the Blue Jays at the end. So there were other positive things. This isn't the only team Canada that's down in the States today trying to eke out a win.
Yeah, I see your Jays jersey there. Don't you worry, we all saw it. And that's allowed. That's allowed. Flavio Volpe, nice to see you today. Thanks for making the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rosie.
It's allowed because there's only one baseball team. So what are you going to do? You know, if it was something else. Anything else that you think is I don't know, a sign, because right now we're kind of reading tea leaves until this meeting is over, and maybe there'll be a press conference and maybe there won't. We don't know.
Yeah, it's like, I think journalists, we need to take the same kind of posture that the Prime Minister's office takes when we call them to get reaction from the latest tweet or whatever about tariffs. Is like, we need to see the fine print. Like, this all sounds like something. We need to see in writing specifically what it is. Does this mean there's going to be a finalized announcement today where they say this is happening on tariff X, Y, and Z, and this is what we've agreed to on quotas? We don't know. Or is this merely the president giving his directional approval to the conversations that have taken in advance to this meeting, and now gives the green light for officials to go back and hammer out final agreements, right? We don't know what this means, because this is the same challenge we have with everything with President Trump, is that the words sound like they have a very specific meaning, but they are written in sand, and they can change rather quickly. So we are going to hear, we suspect, from Dominic LeBlanc at some point today. We'd really like to hear from the Prime Minister at some point today, but as of right now, there is no plan for that. So we'll see. If he is truly coming home happy, I can't imagine he will come home without speaking. That seems like the sort of thing.
That win, yeah.
I mean, the approach has been one message, one messenger, and that messenger has been the Prime Minister on this. Why it's been hard to get people on these files to do interviews and speak on these days. So if it is truly moving in the good direction, LeBlanc's a good guy to rag the puck, and I say that as a compliment, to get through difficult questions, but the Prime Minister will want to drive home what he's agreed to and why, if it does get to that point, I think.
The other thing that struck me out of that was the president brought up the Golden Dome again, which does seem to be, I mean, not that it wasn't real, but it does seem to be something that Canada might want a part of at some point. And I only raise that because that, again, is another issue where maybe there's some give there. Maybe there's something that Canada can say or do to show cooperation on the files that the president wants to see cooperation in, and then not the others where he has concern.
Yeah, I think it's another issue where, Canada's going to have to make some difficult choices about what it's going to be involved in, where it's going to find common cause with the United States moving forward. The idea that the old relationship is over doesn't necessarily mean that there won't be some kind of relationship going forward, but what does that look like, and what are Canadians willing to accept? I think in certain corners, the Canadian public is more willing to make a break with the United States than maybe business interests and even political interests are willing to make a break with the United States. What does that look like? The idea of continental security still makes a lot of sense. The problem is, how far integrated do we want to be with the United States moving forward? And also, the other part that I think this just underlines again is, yes, the relationship looks good between the two men. That's good. There were days when it looked pretty good between Justin Trudeau and Donald Trump. That didn't end well. And whatever comes out of today, how long does it last? Does it necessarily preclude other things happening? Right. The idea that there's a deal and a solution that solves this issue for years, I just think that's a kind of fanciful idea at this point.
Yeah, it's an unsolvable problem.
USMCA still exists, and yet we still have these problems. So the idea that anything that comes out of today is necessarily going to solve this issue for the foreseeable future, we should caution ourselves not to believe that.
Yeah, especially because things sort of not fell apart, but they stalled over the summer after a decent meeting back in May that you were there. We got about a minute left.
Yeah, well, and even at the G7 in Kananaskis, they agreed that they would try to get things wrapped up within 30 days, July 21, and then right before July 21, the 35% base tariff was announced, though with CUSMA carve-outs and exemptions that came in on August 1, and it keeps resetting the clock. And I think this is the frustration with Canada. It is like running in mud, that you make a little bit of progress, but it's just hard to get to the end point until the president signs off, and we just saw that display to keep it focused and move towards a conclusion of that meeting. Good luck to the Prime Minister.
But the president's saying you'll find out, so we will at some point. And also the people of Canada will love us again. We'll see. Aaron Wary, David Cochrane, thank you all very much for helping us with our coverage. Thank you for watching our special coverage of the Prime Minister's meeting with the U.S. President. David will have lots more coverage on power and politics later today. And of course, we'll continue dissecting and trying to understand what happened there on CBC News Network throughout the day. I'm Rosemary Barton. Thank you for watching. Don't go anywhere. More right after this.
Hello, I'm Andrew Nichols. This is CBC News Network. Prime Minister Mark Carney is meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump this hour. The two leaders are inside the White House right now. We are covering all the angles for you, and we will have interviews with key stakeholders. Trump and Carney are scheduled to be in a working